Outside, the snow blanketed the mountain slope in a silence so dense it seemed to muffle even memory. Wind swept through warped wooden beams, howling like it was calling for something long buried beneath frost and time. A rusted sign hung crooked at the entrance, the letters barely legible. K9 Recovery Center, Facility 47. But no one was recovering here, and Rook 71 knew that. Inside there were no barks, no howls, only metal, the cold clang of latches locking, the scraping sound of steel cages dragged across concrete, boots, heavy and indifferent, stomping past on wet cement, the sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with the stale iron scent of old blood and the burnt hair of forgotten bodies. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew. It was the smell of last days. At the end of a dim corridor, under a flickering fluorescent bulb that blinked like a dying pulse, Rook 71 lay inside a solitary cage, set apart from the others. No nameplate, no file clipped to the bars, just a number scribbled in red ink. X/71 rejected. Rook didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't whimper, didn't tremble like the others pacing in circles, barking at nothing, hoping for someone. Rook simply lay still, like a statue carved from ash and snow, eyes wide open, but hollow. His chest rose and fell just barely, enough to prove he was not yet dead. Across the aisle, a young staffer walked by, clipboard in hand, voice detached and flat. Rook 71, no response, no engagement behavior, failed to meet training benchmarks. Status, null, recommended disposal, 1,400 hours. The woman behind him, white coat, hair tied back, eyes dull from too many verdicts, gave a slight nod. Don't sedate, just leave him. He doesn't feel anything anymore. But they were wrong. Inside that silence they thought was emptiness. Rook was listening. Just not with his ears. Every sound, every rusted latch, every flick of a page, every pair of boots moving passed through the steel bars like distant echoes in a war bunker. He didn't move. Not because he couldn't, but because, what would be the point? Everything that once had a name had been taken. The first name, gone. The first command, forgotten. The last time he fought back, he woke up covered in his own blood, breath barely hanging on. And since then, Rook had learned, existence in this place was not something to fight for. It was something to erase. The entrance door creaked open. A cold gust swept in, carrying snowflakes like tiny glass shards across the floor. But Rook didn't lift his head. People came and went here like ghosts, eyes open, hearts closed. No one called him by his real name anymore. Maybe they never even knew it. The metal tag on his cage trembled in the draft. Clink. And Rook stayed still. A number waiting to be deleted. A name waiting to be remembered. But what no one expected was already on its way. Just not yet. At that same moment, at the base of the hill below the center, the low growl of an old gray-blue pickup truck rumbled steadily uphill. The body was rusted, the windshield fogged with breath and cold, and in the bed, just a few scattered tools and a dented toolbox. Enough to say its owner had stopped caring about the little things a long time ago. His name was Jonas Whitaker, a mechanic, born and raised in the mountains. Alone for 3 years now, ever since cancer took his wife. Since that day, his garage, once filled with the laughter of regulars, the twang of old rock and roll on a dusty radio, and the comforting scent of motor oil, had turned into a tomb for silence, a place where time stopped moving forward. Jonas didn't know why he was driving up that hill today. The sky was still gray, snow in the air, the kind that clings to breath and memory. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled flyer. Adoption opportunity. Decommissioned K9 units, Facility 47, today only. He couldn't even remember where he got it. Maybe from the counter at the gas station. Or maybe someone had slipped it under his windshield last night. But when he saw the word decommissioned, printed in bold red, something cracked inside his chest. Not because he needed a dog. Jonas wasn't even sure he needed anything anymore. But the truck kept moving. No stops, no second guesses. When Jonas stepped through the half-open gate, no one noticed. Just a tall man with graying, tangled hair under a fraying mechanic's coat. Weathered face. Calloused hands that hadn't held anything soft in years. He entered the main hallway. The lights above flickered with sterile indifference. The smell of bleach hit first, sharp and invasive. And instantly, a weight settled in his chest. This wasn't a place for the living. Cages lined both sides. Some dogs barked, some whimpered. A few stood up, wagging faint tails, reaching for any passing glance. But most just sat still. Eyes hollow, hope gone. Jonas walked slowly. No plan, no idea what he was looking for, but he didn't rush, didn't miss a single face, until he stopped at the last cage. And there was Rook 71, still, silent, eyes unfocused, not even a flick of an ear to acknowledge Jonas's presence. But something about that dog, something unspoken, unfinished, held. Jonas in place. He didn't speak, didn't move. 10, maybe 15 seconds passed. The world around them seemed to mute itself, and then, without understanding why, Jonas knelt down, his voice barely audible. Rough, from somewhere buried deep. Rook. Just one word. A name, a feeling, and maybe a whisper the dog had been waiting a lifetime to hear. Rook didn't turn his head right away. No twitch, no instinctive reaction, but the eyes, they shifted. From staring into nothing, those dark eyes slowly tracked toward Jonas, and stopped. Not with suspicion, not with fear, but with something almost harder to believe. Recognition. The cold in the air seemed to tighten. A staffer approached, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. "You looking at that one?" he asked. "That one's not for adoption. It's broken, non-responsive, no training compatibility." Jonas didn't answer. His eyes were locked with Rook's. "What's his name?" Jonas asked quietly. The guy hesitated, thrown off by the question. "No name, just a designation. Rook 71. Jonas's jaw tensed, like something had just clicked into place, something both right and wrong at once. "No," he murmured. "His name is Rook." And in that moment, Rook stood, not fast, not dramatic, but deliberate, unmistakable, his entire frame stretched as if a sleeping war machine had just rebooted. He took a step forward, stopping at the cage bars, eyes locked on Jonas, nose twitching faintly, trying to place a scent in the wind, like trying to find a familiar face in a forgotten dream. The staffer stumbled back a step. "What the hell? He's never moved. He never—" Jonas crouched lower. The hesitation was gone from his voice. "I want him." "You can't," the staffer replied. "He's on the termination list, 3 p.m. today. Then I'm taking him before 3. The silence that followed felt like the whole building had stopped breathing. A woman in a lab coat stepped in, gripping a clipboard with both hands. Her voice was more careful. "Do you even know what he is? No vet papers, no records, no insurance, unrehabilitated, and—" She hesitated. No clear reason for rejection. Jonas didn't flinch. "I don't need papers." "Do you have any military training?" "I fix engines, no training, but I know what deserves another chance." The woman exchanged a look with the staffer. He shrugged, half confused, half surrendering. "You'll need to sign a full liability waiver. We won't be responsible for anything that happens." "Give me the paperwork." Rook remained still, not barking, not backing away, body taut like wire, but not to attack, to respond, to something that might finally be real. Jonas filled out the form, signed his name. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something older, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe, just maybe, something was waiting for him again. When they unlocked the cage, the staffer held the heavy iron leash cautiously. But Rook didn't resist, didn't lunge, didn't even move. Not until he looked at Jonas, then waited. Jonas didn't call, didn't snap his fingers. He just held out his hand, palm open, quiet. And Rook stepped forward. 1 step, 2, stopped right beside him. The staffer's mouth dropped open. "No way," the woman whispered almost to herself. "I've never seen that before." Outside, snow had begun to fall. Wind clawed through the pine trees, rattling the corrugated metal roof. Jonas opened the passenger door. Rook hesitated, then jumped in. One clean motion. No one said a word. They didn't need to. The old pickup rolled away from the center, tires crunching over the snow-packed road, leaving behind a maze of steel cages and stunned faces. Inside the truck, Jonas glanced over at the dog now sitting beside him. No whining, no growling, just quiet breathing, and eyes no longer empty, but searching. "Rook," Jonas said softly, not looking straight at him. "I don't know what you've been through, but if you're still standing after all that, then maybe I should try again too." Rook didn't react, but just as Jonas took the first turn away from the center, Rook rested his head on Jonas's arm. Not pressing, not demanding, just there, like a whisper, "I've chosen you." And so they drove on, a man who had lost everything, and a dog who had never been given anything. Neither of them knew that the road ahead would lead to something bigger than memory, bigger than truth, bigger than honor itself. Jonas's garage sat on the outer edge of Windridge, tucked into the bones of an old warehouse long forgotten by the town. Moss clung to the walls. The metal roll-up door groaned with every push. Inside, it was nothing more than a skeleton of a life half-lived. 2 cars waiting for repairs, rows of rusting parts, a stuttering electric heater, and a fold-out bed pushed against a bare concrete wall that hadn't seen a photo in years. Jonas didn't live here because he wanted to. He lived here because there was nowhere else left to go. He cut the engine and stepped out, hand cranking the roll-up door. The metallic rattle echoed through the hollow space. When he opened the passenger side, Rook jumped down. No hesitation. No leash tug. Like the scent of old. Motor oil and the slow groan of metal springs were things Rook had known before. Jonas walked in first. Rook followed. Not too close, not too far, just enough distance, like a soldier who still remembered patrol formation. "Welcome home," Jonas muttered with a dry chuckle. "No welcome sign, but plenty of drafts." Rook didn't react. Instead, the dog paced the garage perimeter, nose low to the ground, sniffing every tool, every crack in the wall. Nothing frantic, nothing playful, but never relaxed. His posture stayed low, ears up, eyes scanning. "You military?" Jonas asked under his breath. "Or one of those 4-legged CIA ghosts?" No answer. Just Rook's shadow stretching across the cold concrete floor like a memory that hadn't fully dried. That first night, Jonas heated up canned soup and split it between them. Rook ate every bite, no mess, no slobber, no begging for more. He ate not like a pet, but like something that had learned survival was not a luxury. When Jonas clicked off the lights and collapsed onto the folding bed, he expected to hear pacing, maybe a low whine. But Rook was silent. When Jonas cracked an eye, he saw the silhouette by the door. Still, watching. A statue with breath. Rook stood facing outward like he was guarding something, or expecting something. and Jonas felt a chill crawl up his back, like maybe someone out there was staring right back in. It happened every night after that. Rook didn't sleep, didn't bark, didn't make a sound. He just stood guard like a forgotten sentinel holding a shift no one had relieved. The scariest part wasn't Rook's silence. It was how Jonas began to feel comfort in it. On the 5th night, Jonas was welding a windshield brace for an old van. The power flickered. Sparks flew. A short circuit killed the lights, plunging the garage into darkness. He muttered, "Damn it." Then a low growl rolled out from across the room. Not loud, but deep, cold, ancient. Jonas spun toward the door, the same one Rook always watched. The dog was there now, teeth barely bared, body tense, eyes glowing in the dark. "Rook," Jonas called, reaching for a flashlight. Rook didn't move, eyes locked on the base of the door. Jonas swept the light around the room. Nothing. Empty, but then just under the door a scratch mark. Fresh, thin, as if metal claws had lightly scraped the floor. Jonas crouched, running his fingers over it, still sharp. Dust still disturbed. Not Rook's. Rook didn't look back. He already knew. Jonas didn't sleep that night. He sat against an old oil drum, unopened beer in one hand, a steel pipe in the other. Rook laid a few feet away, still facing the door. Not blinking. Not breathing heavy. Just waiting. Just listening. Jonas said nothing. But in his mind, the questions were no longer about what Rook had been. They were now about who might still be looking for him, and why. The dog never slept. The next morning, the snow began to melt. Water dripped from the rusted roof, carving quiet lines through the frozen mud. Jonas brewed 2 cups of coffee, a habit left over from the days when he still had someone to hand one to. Today, for the first time in 3 years, he placed the 2nd cup on the table. Not for Rook, but for the presence. Later that morning, Jonas called Rook out back, a narrow brick-lined patch behind the garage. A rusted faucet, a plastic bucket that had seen too many winters. He turned the spigot, tested the hose, and motioned Rook closer. He didn't flinch, didn't fear the water, didn't wag his tail in joy either. Rook just stood there, eyes open, ears listening, body locked in silent muscle. Jonas crouched down and began rinsing. Dirt, dried mud, and old blood from the facility ran in murky streams across the cracked bricks. He worked his fingers deep into the thick coat, scrubbing from neck to back. Rook's body was solid, no scars like most combat dogs, just dense, precise muscle. Like he had been designed, not born. But when Jonas reached the left shoulder, his hand stopped. Beneath the fur, tucked near the scapula, something hard pressed into his palm, oval-shaped, firm, embedded. Metal? Ceramic? Jonas pressed gently, curious. Rook flinched. No growl, no turn of the head, but the entire body coiled, tight as a loaded spring. Eyes wide, ears shot up. The stance of a soldier, not a dog. Jonas backed off, exhaling slowly. "Easy, bud. I'm not here to hurt you." But Rook didn't relax. He held position, not out of fear, but obedience, discipline. Jonas wiped his hands on his jeans, then grabbed a flashlight off the wall. He knelt beside Rook again, parting the wet fur. Underneath, he found it. A surgical scar. Thin, nearly invisible. You'd only find it if you already knew where to look. The stitches had fused with the skin. "What the hell?" He pressed again, softer this time. Rook didn't flinch, but he turned, just slightly. A sharp glance, almost human, not threatening, not begging, just warning. "I know you found it. Try that again and see what happens." Jonas pulled away and sat back on the damp ground. His skin ran cold. Not from the wind, but from a question that now had shape. Why does a dog with no name have a device under his skin? And why does he react, not like an animal, but like someone trained? That night, Jonas searched. He booted up his old laptop and scanned the chip with a standard RFID reader, the kind vets use for microchips. Nothing. He borrowed a scanner from a vet tech near the gas station. Still no data. The device picked up a signal, but not one it could translate. A message blinked on screen. Unreadable code. Unauthorized frequency. Jonas stared at the screen, his knuckles bone white against the mouse. Later, he flipped off the lights and dropped beside Rook, who still lay facing the garage door like always. Same posture, same stare, guarding a world that didn't guard back. "What the hell are you, Rook?" No answer. But then, Rook turned. Not away, not evasive, not scared. He looked at Jonas and held the gaze. And for the first time, Jonas saw something besides alertness. He saw sorrow. Not loud, not pleading, just the quiet grief of something that had everything taken. And stayed anyway. After that night, Jonas stopped researching. He stopped asking. But he kept the steel pipe next to the bed and started locking the garage from the inside. During the day, Rook didn't act up, didn't bark, didn't destroy things. But he didn't warm up either. Even when Jonas tried, kept the door open, played soft radio, gave extra food, Rook never broke the invisible line, always close to the exit, lying at an angle, never exposing his back. Once, Jonas tried walking up from behind. Rook didn't turn, but an ear twitched. Like he'd calculated 5 different evasive options, just in case. One morning, Jonas was welding a new chassis rail for an old Ford F-150. He powered on the plasma arc, small, quiet, just enough for clean seams. The moment the current fired, Rook growled. Low, deep, primal. Jonas jolted. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't fear. It was a trigger. Rook shot to his feet, his entire frame aligned like a weapon. Head low, shoulders raised, weight shifted forward. His eyes weren't on Jonas. They were locked on the machine. Then, with no warning, Rook launched, not toward Jonas, but directly at the plasma unit. "Rook, no!" Jonas shouted. But Rook didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't hear. Or maybe he wasn't in control anymore. In a flash, Rook launched over the workbench. The toolbox went crashing to the floor. Metal clattered, screws flew. His body slammed into the far corner of the garage, right where the plasma unit hummed and pulsed. With one explosive lunge, Rook shattered the casing. The machine cracked open, spitting sparks, and a hiss of pale blue static. Jonas scrambled, yanking the power cord from the wall. The unit sputtered and died. Rook didn't stop immediately. He stood over the mangled machine, chest heaving, eyes wide, growling deep from somewhere ancient inside him, like he'd just neutralized a threat, one Jonas couldn't even see. Then, slowly, Rook took a step back, another, and sat down. Not facing Jonas, still watching the wreckage, still ready, silent, like a soldier at the end of an assignment no one asked for. Jonas stood frozen, his heart hammering. He walked forward slowly, both hands up. "Rook!" Rook turned, eyes no longer wild, no more growl. His breathing softened. But Jonas had seen it. That wasn't panic, that wasn't instinct, that was a switch being flipped. That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He pulled up the plasma unit's manual on his laptop. Specifications, diagrams, frequency settings, default activation frequency, 46 kilohertz. Most people wouldn't blink at that number, but Jonas had once been a backline mechanic in Afghanistan. Not elite, but close enough to special ops to catch whispers. He'd heard about frequency-activated response conditioning, a rare kind of K9 training. No verbal commands, no hand signals, just signals sent by devices, pulses that only the dog could hear and obey. Jonas glanced over at Rook. Same place, same pose by the door. But something was different tonight. That look in Rook's eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was control. Rook knew what had happened. Rook remembered. And Rook didn't want Jonas to understand. Jonas stood and walked to the far workbench. He pulled open a locked drawer and retrieved a small aluminum case. Inside, a set of basic RF sensors and interference meters, tools he'd used back in the day to test faulty alternators or suppressors. He walked quietly to the same spot Rook had stood when he snapped. He placed the sensor on the floor and powered it on. The screen blinked. Anomalous feedback detected. Secondary signal. Unidentified source. Jonas didn't move. His fingers gripped the device so hard the plastic casing creaked, and for the first time since Rook arrived, Jonas didn't lock the garage door from the inside that night. He didn't trust the locks anymore. He sat, pipe in hand, eyes wide, watching the dark, watching Rook, who lay silent on the far end of the room, the same as always. But nothing felt the same. Rook wasn't just a rescued dog anymore, wasn't a companion, wasn't a survivor. He was something else now, something that had once been part of a system, then deleted. The next morning, the world was cloaked in fog. Jonas didn't eat, didn't make coffee. He just sat there for a long while, watching Rook, like he was trying to find something buried behind those still eyes, something he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Rook didn't pant, didn't fidget, didn't meet his gaze. But when Jonas picked up the leash, for the first time since bringing him home, Rook stepped forward. No command, no cue, just moved. Good, Jonas muttered under his breath, because we're going to see someone who might help me figure out what the hell you are. They drove for nearly an hour, winding through pine-covered hills shrouded in mist. The roads curved like old scars on the mountain's side. At the far edge of a slope, tucked behind a thicket of bare trees, sat a weathered log cabin, the kind that whispered stories without saying a word. This was where Dr. Mercer had disappeared to. Once the lead military veterinary strategist for the Department of Defense, Mercer had overseen canine programs after Iraq. Jonas had once rebuilt his rusted-out Jeep from the brink of the junkyard, and since then, they'd kept an unspoken bond, the kind where favors didn't need to be requested, and thank yous were implied through silence. The cabin was surrounded by rusted, barbed wire. A decommissioned Humvee sat beneath a tarp on the side. An old American flag drooped at half-staff from a pole hammered into the roof's edge. Jonas didn't cut the engine. Rook sat beside him, nose twitching, head slightly tilted, sensing something. Then, stillness. Mercer was already on the porch, mug in hand, eyes sharp as the wind. "You came without calling," Mercer said, voice even. "If I had, I might have talked myself out of it," Jonas replied as he opened the door. Mercer's eyes tracked Rook as the dog stepped down. And immediately, he frowned, not out of fear, but recognition. Something in that posture, that stillness, something Mercer knew intimately and shouldn't be seeing again. "What's his name?" Mercer asked. Jonas kept his eyes on Rook. "Rook," Mercer set his mug down on the porch rail. "Come in, quickly." Inside, he led them to the back, a converted field clinic. The metal table gleamed despite the rust on its base. Shelves of forgotten medications lined the walls. In one corner, an old portable scanner hummed quietly. Rook walked in without hesitation. Jonas stayed near the door, silent, watching. Mercer pulled on gloves, knelt, and placed his hand gently on Rook's left shoulder. The moment his fingers found the spot under the fur, Rook's body stiffened. Mercer pulled back. His eyes darkened. Layered response trigger. Second generation. Jonas squinted. What does that mean? This isn't a pet chip, Mercer said. It's high-grade encryption, black-level tech, used in an experimental behavioral program, shut down years ago. No registry, no logs. If you try to scan it, it just pings noise. But it's active, records behavior, and... He paused. Activates. By wave tier. Jonas felt the chill slide down his back. You're saying it's remote-controlled? Mercer nodded, slow and grim. Not like flipping a switch and the dog attacks. More like preloaded commands, deep memory. When the right frequency hits, he tapped his temple. They remember. Jonas turned to look at Rook. Still calm. Eyes half closed. But those ears, twitching with the softest rhythmic alertness. So who could plant something like that? He asked. Mercer stared at Jonas for a long time. Then, in a low voice, almost a whisper, he answered. That project was called Sentinel K9, Mercer said, voice low but sharp. It was developed at a research outpost near the Colorado border. Second-generation K9s. No traditional training, just programming. They didn't respond by instinct, they followed scripts. And if this one is part of that program... He turned to Rook, eyes like tempered steel. Then he should have been destroyed a long time ago. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. Jonas could feel his thoughts spiraling. Rook, the dog he thought was just a survivor, might be an unfinished weapon. I need to know, Jonas said, his voice gravel. Is he dangerous? Mercer looked at him for a long time, then answered, I don't know. But if one day he remembers everything they programmed into him... Jonas cut him off. Number he already rejected a command. What? He destroyed the transmitter. No hesitation, no fog in his eyes, no trembling legs. He chose to break the order. Mercer sat down slowly, the first time he let his shoulders fall. He looked at Rook, and something in his eyes softened, not with affection, but with the weight of recognition, of memory. Then you need to understand this, Jonas. His words came like carving steel across the air. Not everyone wants a K9 that knows how to choose. The atmosphere shifted. Jonas couldn't look away from Rook. The dog lay quietly on the floor, unmoving, but something in that posture told him Rook was listening. Not with his ears, but with every nerve in his body, like a soldier made to remember the battlefield, whether he wanted to or not. Mercer rose and crossed to an old wooden shelf along the back wall. He pulled out a dust-covered file box, flipped the lid. Inside, scattered documents, yellowed sheets, binders still stamped with blurred-out seals. He dragged a stack out and dropped it on the steel table. Jonas stepped forward, flipping through each page. No titles, no logos, just a code. SK9-G, EN2-PROT-ALP, HA. Then came the behavior charts, notes scribbled in old ink, independent behavior mapping, reflex override capacity, nonverbal parallel command systems. And finally, one handwritten line near the bottom. Phase 4 terminated. Unstable. Too many variables. Jonas gripped the paper tighter. His voice was rough. What the hell was this project, Mercer? The old man poured tea with a faint tremble in his hand. He sat back down, not as a scientist, but as someone confessing to a ghost he thought he'd buried. About a decade ago, the military started asking dangerous questions, Mercer said quietly. What happens when humans give the wrong command? What if a dog could assess instead of obey? He paused. That's how second-gen K9s were born. Jonas blinked. His mouth tightened. Mercer continued. They weren't genetically modified. It was psychological reconstruction, training embedded from early development. They weren't just taught to follow. They were taught how to say no. Say no, Jonas repeated. Ethical response filtering, civilian interference, situational morality, things we thought were revolutionary. Mercer let out a bitter chuckle. Until one of them, a dog like Rook, did exactly what we asked. It refused to execute a kill order, and the first thing the system did was erase him from existence. The room went dead quiet. Jonas didn't move. In his mind, broken images began to align: the cold shelter, the coded ID, the trigger response, the refusal to sleep near anyone's back. Rook had been marked for destruction, not for failure, but for doing the right thing. "And now he's here," Jonas whispered. "Because I said his name?" Mercer shook his head gently. "No, Jonas, because he remembered it." A gust of wind moaned through the cracks in the wooden door. Rook opened his eyes. And once again, they didn't look like a dog's. They looked like someone who had been forced to forget, and chose to remember anyway. Jonas lowered his head. His own memories of combat, of split-second choices, of men who died because the chain of command wouldn't bend, came flooding back. And now, in front of him, was a creature that had done what no man on that field had ever dared. Mercer stepped forward, placing a hand on Jonas's shoulder. His voice was heavy, not with fear, but with truth. "You're holding a piece of memory the government would rather erase. A living proof that there's something out there more loyal than a soldier." He looked at Rook, then back to Jonas. "And braver than the ones who give the orders." Jonas clenched his fist. "And they won't just let this go, will they?" Mercer didn't answer. He only turned toward the window, watching the pine trees sway gently in the breeze. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, almost as if speaking to a memory, he said, "It's not the dogs that bark you should fear, Jonas. It's the ones who've been forced to stay silent." Jonas turned his gaze toward Rook. Those eyes looked back, steady, unafraid, unflinching. What they held wasn't fear. It was trust, trust in a man. And in a name. That had been called again, not out of duty, not out of debt, but from something softer, harder to name, a bond faint and fragile, yet real enough that Jonas couldn't walk away. He stood, walked out of Mercer's cabin without waiting for a goodbye. Rook followed. No signal, no leash, no voice. Just walked beside him as if the choice to do so had been wired directly into Jonas's decision, not into a command. The wind swept over the hillside as they left the wooden cabin. Gray skies above, streaked with birds cutting across like old memories returning on wings. Inside Jonas's mind, Mercer's warnings circled the codes, the frequencies, the buried project, and the men still trying to erase it. He could have left Rook behind. That would have been the logical thing, maybe even the safest. But as the old pickup rolled down the dirt path, and Jonas caught Rook's reflection in the side mirror, sitting exactly where he always did, head slightly tilted, ears tuned to the wind, Jonas knew he wouldn't. Couldn't. Because the way Rook looked at him, no begging, no pleading, only presence, not demanding, just trusting. That wasn't the look of a dog. It was the look of a being that had once been betrayed by its own creators, and was now trying, against all odds, to trust again. That afternoon, Jonas returned to the garage. He didn't say a word. He just opened the door wide, then cleared the far left corner where he used to store old oil cans and broken tools. From the attic above, he pulled down a thin mattress, shook off the dust, and laid it neatly against the wall. A pillow? a worn blanket, one that used to belong to his wife. And finally, he placed a small scrap of cloth on the mattress, faintly scented with oil and antiseptic, a scent Rook had grown familiar with. No instructions, no gesture. Rook walked over, sniffed once, then lay down. For the first time. Not curled up, not wedged into a shadow, not stationed by the door. Rook stretched out eyes half closed, body soft like a machine that had finally been unplugged after years of tension. Jonas sat across from him. He didn't touch Rook, didn't speak. He just watched. And in that stillness, without a single sound, he heard something he hadn't in a very long time. Steady breathing, not the breath of a machine, not the programmed rhythms of an engineered mind, but the quiet, trembling breath of a living being, hoping this time, maybe, things could be different. Outside, the snow began to melt. A new night would come, but for the first time in months, Jonas didn't lock the garage door. He didn't keep the pipe wrench beside his bed, because he knew the boy wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. The next morning, sunlight crept in through the dusty glass above the garage door. The first rays spilled across the cold concrete floor, drifting over the worn blanket where Rook still lay, breathing steady, like a breeze through the quiet. Jonas rose slowly. He stepped down, brewed coffee using the old machine, its clicks and clacks releasing a gentle warmth into the air. Rook hadn't stirred. Not asleep exactly, just still. Jonas pushed open the door to the porch, letting the crisp morning air brush past his shoulders. And that's when he saw it. A yellowed envelope, no stamp, no return address, placed dead center on the step, as if someone had made sure there was no way he'd miss it. Jonas crouched and picked it up. The paper was damp at the edges, the cut uneven, like it had been torn by calloused fingers. No ink, no markings, just a single sharp fold down the center. Precise, like a soldier's crease. He opened it. Inside was a grainy photo, rough paper, the kind used in military units, the kind meant to be burned, to leave no trace. It was taken at night, cold lighting, cracked concrete beneath, a limp American flag in the background. At the center, a dog. Rook, unmistakably. Dressed in tan combat armor, infrared sensors strapped to both sides. A harness hugged his lean frame, and in his eyes, there was no calm, no softness, only steel, eyes honed on a target, whatever it might be. Beside him, a man in uniform, his face crossed out in thick black ink, crude strokes, deliberate, as if someone had declared, "This one doesn't deserve to be remembered." At the bottom of the photo, scrawled in red marker, "You weren't meant to survive, but you made a choice." Jonas stood frozen. His throat tightened. Fingers crushed the edge of the photo. The wind slipped through the doorframe behind him, making the envelope whisper like breath against the wall. He stepped back inside, closed the door, locked it. Rook was already sitting up. He hadn't looked at Jonas, but he'd caught the scent of ink, of threat, of memory. Jonas didn't hide the photo. He laid it on the table, fully visible. Rook stepped forward, looked at it. His eyes stopped at the inked-out face, and for 10 full seconds, he didn't blink. Jonas spoke, voice low, steady. "I think that man was your handler, wasn't he?" Rook didn't move, but his entire frame seemed to tighten, not to attack, but to suppress something rising from deep within. Jonas poured another cup of coffee, sat across the table, never taking his eyes off the dog. If they sent this, it means they know you're still alive. It means they're searching. And soon, it won't just be letters. He sat in silence for a long time, eyes fixed on the red words on the photo. You made a choice. The sentence echoed through his mind like a shout down a tunnel of memory. Jonas sighed, then nodded, to no one but himself. Then I'll choose too. Rook turned toward him. For the first time since dawn, their eyes met, and in that instant, no words were needed. They both understood. There was no turning back now. Jonas rose and slowly stepped toward Rook, photo still in hand. You know who that man is, he whispered. You know, don't you? Rook didn't move, but his eyes never left that line at the bottom of the photo, as if each letter carved into it had sliced open a memory Rook had fought to bury. Jonas began to set the photo. Down! And suddenly Rook growled. It wasn't a bark, it wasn't a howl, it was a growl, low, guttural, tearing up from deep inside the chest, ragged and relentless, like Rook's ribcage was no longer big enough to contain what was breaking free inside. Jonas stepped back instinctively. Rook didn't lunge, didn't attack, but every muscle in his body went taut, a trembling tension rising beneath the fur. His eyes, they no longer looked at Jonas, no longer looked at the photo. They were looking through the room, through time, into someplace else. Suddenly, Rook slammed his front paws against the concrete floor, hard. The claws tore into the cement like blades. Scratch, then scratch again, gasping, panting. White foam gathered at the edge of his mouth. Jonas stood frozen. This wasn't rage. This was a seizure of memory, an instinct clawing its way back from the dark, and not even Rook could stop it. No, Rook, look at me! Jonas dropped to his knees, threw his arms around the dog's neck, held tight, his cheek pressed against Rook's ear. His voice shook, stripped of command, only pleading now. I'm here. You hear me? It's Jonas. The garage, black coffee, snow, old pillow. This isn't war. These aren't orders. It's not them. Rook thrashed, not to strike, but like he was trying to escape his own body. His back legs kicked wildly, his head snapped back, and his eyes, wet, for the first time, actually wet. Jonas held tighter. His entire body shook with every tremor that rippled through Rook's steel-hard frame. And then, like someone had cut the sound. Silence. The garage fell still. Rook stopped. No more growling, no more scratching, just lying there, breathing hard. Then, slower. Slower, until all that remained was a single, fragile exhale, the kind you take after crawling out of a nightmare that lasted longer than a lifetime. Jonas didn't let go. Not because he was afraid Rook would break loose again, but because he needed to hold on. To something real. To something that had survived. 10 minutes passed. Neither of them moved. The photo slipped from Jonas' hand, falling face down to the floor, but the red handwriting still showed through the paper. You made a choice. And in that moment, more than ever before, Jonas understood. What Rook had remembered wasn't just the man in the photo. It was the cost of choosing. That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He sat in the wooden chair by the wall, eyes fixed on the dark corner of the garage, where Rook lay still. Not twitching, not dreaming, not growling anymore, just awake. And the look in his eyes wasn't that of a dog keeping watch. It was the look of a soldier who no longer knew where the base ended and the battlefield began. Jonas tilted his head slightly, trying to recall the faces he once knew in his old unit, those eyes that never really came home. Awake. Too awake, not because they feared death, but because they'd forgotten what safety felt like. Rook was looking at him like that now, silent, unblinking, not moving closer, just watching, as if waiting for an order or a sentence. Outside, snow fell again, flakes light as ash, vanishing in the cold air. Jonas lit a cigarette, took a long drag, then crushed it out before it even burned halfway. The questions were getting louder, sharper, harder to ignore. Who sent the photo? How did they know Rook was here? Why now? And worst of all, why? Did Rook react like that? Like something inside him had died, or wanted to? The old wall clock struck 3. 3 slow, hollow chimes that echoed through the stillness like a warning. Jonas stood, walked toward Rook. The dog was still staring at him, motionless, watching, waiting. Jonas sat down. Not too close, just enough to let his voice reach. "What do you remember, buddy?" Rook blinked, just once. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jonas let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He reached out, not forcefully, just a slow hand to Rook's shoulder, the one with the implant buried beneath. Rook didn't growl, didn't flinch. He just closed his eyes. Slowly. It wasn't fear, it wasn't surrender, it was agreement. Jonas stood again, walked back to the table, picked up the photo, looked closer. That red line slashed through the soldier's face, but it didn't hide everything. The eyes were still there. And in those eyes, a kind of sorrow. A sorrow that looked a hell of a lot like what Jonas had seen in Rook's eyes just hours ago. He flipped the photo over. Blank. But when he tilted it under the desk lamp just right, a nearly invisible line of ink appeared. Faint, faded, but legible. One word. Brass. Jonas repeated it in his head. Brass. A name? A code name? A message? A threat? No answers. But his spine went cold. He quietly opened the drawer, pulled out the handgun he hadn't touched in years, wiped it clean, checked the magazine, then placed it on the table beside the photo. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, Rook didn't sleep. And for the first time in years, Jonas was afraid. Not of Rook, but of whatever Rook had just remembered. The next morning, Jonas drove off before the sun had fully risen. He left no note, didn't lock the door. Rook stayed behind, as if knowing this was a trip not meant for both of them. The road climbed higher into the western hills, winding through fog and brittle silence. It led to the ruins of an old artillery base, decommissioned over a decade ago. Only one man still lived near there. And if there was anyone crazy enough to tell the truth about things buried deep, it was Elliot Banks, an old friend. Once served in the same unit. Now a ghost tucked inside a wooden cabin cut off from everything. There was no doorbell. The windows were boarded shut. But as Jonas stepped out of the truck, the door creaked open. Elliot stood in the frame, hair gray too soon, beard like a thicket, shotgun resting in his hands, rusted but loaded. His eyes scanned Jonas from head to toe, then stopped at what Jonas held. Jonas lifted the small canvas pouch. Inside, the photo and the chip. Elliot didn't say a word, just tilted his head slightly and stepped back. Jonas entered. The house was colder than outside. Sheets covered the furniture, but in the back corner, the glow of old monitors lit up a makeshift command station. Cracked screens, fans wheezing, and obsolete encryption code blinking across the glass. Elliot opened the pouch, pulled the photo first. His face darkened the moment he saw the red slash. Then the chip. With careful gloved hands, he inserted it into a scanner, an ancient military-issue tool from the Afghanistan era. A few seconds passed. Then the screen lit up. Lines of unreadable code scrolled by. No formatting. No manufacturer ID. Just one label burned itself into the middle of the screen. Helix 9. Elliot collapsed into the chair behind him. Hands gripped his head, not from exhaustion, but from dread. Jonas sat across from him, quiet, then finally spoke. "I need to know what it is." Elliot didn't answer right away, just exhaled, lit a cigarette, and dragged so deep it sounded dry. Jonas pressed again. "Elliot, what is it?" Elliot lifted his head. His eyes were rimmed red. Helix 9 wasn't on any formal military record. Not under the Department of Defense. It was a cross-agency project, run by the NSA, DARPA, and a civilian contractor without a known name. Jonas narrowed his eyes. What was the goal? Elliot didn't blink. To build a soldier that didn't look human. Jonas stilled. A being that could think tactically, evaluate mission ethics on the fly, but without emotional excess. No trauma, no PTSD, no betrayal of loyalty, like us. Jonas's hands curled into fists. And if one of them refused a mission? Elliot laughed, dry, bitter. Then it was labeled noise, junk, a glitch in the system. Jonas placed the photo on the table. Elliot glanced down, and his expression shifted fast. Jonas asked, his voice low like wind scraping through a crack in the door. You know who he is? Elliot nodded. But it wasn't just recognition in his eyes. It was a storm part hate, part sorrow. Lieutenant Colonel Harmon Brass, final tier commander of Helix 9. He gave the order to the K-9 units fire on civilian targets if necessary. No exceptions. Jonas gave a slight nod. And Rook refused? Elliot didn't flinch. I saw it in the reports, that look in his eyes. The last time Rook disobeyed a command, it was because a little girl wandered into the kill zone. He stepped in front of the target, didn't move. Brass called it betrayal. After that, every record of Rook was wiped, buried, erased. I'm the only one who still remembers. Jonas's voice dropped further. Why didn't they erase you? Elliot took another long drag. His eyes stared past the cabin wall, as if the truth lived somewhere far off in the woods. Because they thought I'd gone mad, and they're just waiting for me to die. Jonas stood. That chip you've got the data saved? Elliot nodded. And if they find out? A tired grin curled at the edge of Elliot's mouth. His hand settled gently on the old shotgun beside him. Then at least I'll die knowing he's still alive. Jonas turned for the door, but paused. Is he guilty? Elliot's answer didn't come in words, just a look heavy with every ounce of a soldier's regret. Number he was the right choice in a world full of wrong ones. On the drive back, Jonas didn't turn on the radio, didn't light a cigarette. Just sat in silence, letting the pieces Elliot had hurled at him settle like shrapnel inside his chest. Helix 9, a project beyond the books, no records, no apologies. It was born from the ambition of military futurists who dreamed of four-legged soldiers that didn't flinch, didn't betray, and didn't fail. But more importantly, who could choose, not just obey? Choose right. And that one trait was what killed the project. Elliot had explained the original training structure. 3 tiers. Level 1, reflexive obedience. Level 2, tactical assessment. Level 3, independent ethical judgment. Each K-9 unit was implanted with a neural microchip called the Core K, no bigger than a fingernail, but capable of storing thousands of combat scenarios, hundreds of rescue simulations, and exactly 37 types of ethical conflict situations. Of the original 18 Helix 9 dogs, only one displayed the ability to separate command from morality at level 3. That one was Rook. In a simulated urban warfare drill, the directive was clear. Neutralize all targets. There were 3. 1 gunman, 1 explosives vehicle, 1 child who wandered into the crossfire. 17 dogs launched. Rook didn't. He growled, stepped between the child and the kill order, shielded the line of fire with his own body, and waited. Didn't bite, didn't run. He just chose. And that choice threw the entire facility into chaos. The report read, Unit Rook 71 displayed independent moral gating, refused termination directive, classified temporary non-conformance. Hours later, Helix 9 was shut down. Official reason: violation of Uniform Combat Protocol. Real reason: none of the people who signed off on the program were willing to admit that a creature not human had the right to refuse their command. Jonas eased the truck to a stop near the cliff's edge, the whole snow-covered valley stretching out below like a silent battlefield frozen in time. Wind slammed against the windshield, ripping every breath from his lungs as if trying to hollow him out. A dog chose to save a child. And for that, it was erased, not because it failed, but because it did what was right. Jonas pictured Rook last night, the growling, the scratching, the bloodshot eyes, the white foam. No, Rook wasn't going mad. Rook remembered. And that pain, it wasn't instinct, it was memory. It was guilt, the kind that only something with a soul could carry. Jonas leaned his head against the steering wheel, the cold from the metal seeping into his skin. If Elliot was right, then whoever sent that photo wasn't just trying to intimidate. They wanted to provoke, to reactivate something buried, to see. Would Rook bow his head and submit? Or would he fight as a final act of choice? The truck rumbled back to life. Jonas turned the wheel, easing down the snowy trail toward the outskirts, toward the beaten-down garage, nestled deep in the forest's ribs. On the windshield, snow smeared into blurry streaks, smudging the line between past and present. He checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no tires kicking up frost. But something felt off, like eyes on the back of his neck. Jonas slowed, tugged the wheel gently to the side, pulled over, pretended to check the tires, stepped out. Snow whispered under his boots, eyes flicked to the side mirror. Still nothing. He folded the mirror inward, and that's when it hit him. A faint flicker in the corner of his vision, a reflection on the rear window glass, a small glint, a distant light. He stood still, counting. 1, 2, 3. The light blinked out. No sound, no movement, no engine hum, but someone was out there, trying very hard not to be. Jonas slipped back into the cab, quietly. Didn't grab the wheel. Instead, he opened the side panel, pulled out the Glock he had checked just last night, placed it inside the door pocket, then drove. Didn't check the mirror again. He didn't need to. 3 miles from the garage, the road narrowed, empty, surrounded by crooked trees and broken fence posts. The only tire tracks were his own from a week ago, frozen into the mud like echoes. And then he felt it before he heard. It, a sound, soft as a breath, from behind his seat. Not the engine, not the air vents, not the radio. It was a growl, low, rough, from the chest. Jonas glanced at the mirror. Rook was awake, eyes locked on the rear passenger window. No barking, no lunging, just a steady, deep growl. The kind of sound that didn't need proof because it came from a place older than fear. The kind of sound a war veteran makes when they can smell death coming. Jonas gripped the wheel tighter. The wind picked up flinging snow against the windshield like claws. Still no headlights behind him. But Rook kept growling. Ahead, the garage came into view. Jonas didn't slow, didn't park in the usual spot. He drove past, curving around behind the building, pulling into the shadows where he could see the full length of the road. He killed the engine, killed the lights, didn't move. Rook stayed on the back seat, no longer growling but still locked in that same steady stare through the rear window. Not blinking, not resting, just watching. Jonas reached for the gun. No lights, no doors, no radio hum, just silence. He waited. 5 minutes, 10. Still nothing. No tires crunching snow, no silhouettes crossing the tree line, no breath in the wind but their own. And yet, neither of them shifted. Because both of them knew something had crossed the boundary. Jonas didn't turn off the garage light. He left the dim yellow bulb glowing faintly across the ceiling. Not bright, but just enough so they could still see each other. Rook lay by the exit, not whimpering, not howling, but his eyes were open, still, like every nerve in his body was tethered to the dark. Jonas sat a few steps away, the gun tucked quietly beneath his coat, one hand resting near a cold tin of tea that no one remembered to drink. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls. The garage frame creaked, soft, uneasy. Almost half an hour passed before Rook finally blinked. He didn't fall asleep. He just stopped guarding. Jonas leaned back in his chair, too. Neither said a word. Neither needed to. Then, around 3 a.m., the sound came, at first just a faint scratching against the metal siding, then a thud, louder. Metal groaned, something dragged across the cement floor outside. The light above them flickered, once, then again. Jonas was up instantly. His hand found the grip of the pistol. He sprinted toward the far side of the garage, boots hitting the floor like warning shots. He swung around the corner. Nothing. No one. But in the middle of the room, Rook was already on his feet. And he didn't look the same. His muscles were tight, shoulders hunched, every part of him twitching like he was being shocked from the inside out. His eyes were wide, wild, his mouth foamed, and low, guttural hisses escaped through his clenched jaws. Then Rook slammed his body into the wall. Once, then again, not in any direction, not as if chasing anything, like he was trying to break out of himself. Jonas rushed toward him, didn't shout, didn't call, didn't order. He dropped to his knees, close enough that Rook's nose nearly touched his chest. Jonas's voice was low, rough, barely more than a whisper. "Rook!" The growl kept coming. Claws scraped against the floor, but those eyes, they flickered, just for a second. "Rook! No commands, no sit, no heel, not the way a man calls a dog, but the way one soul calls to another." Jonas reached forward. His hand touched Rook's chest, softly, like he was pressing against a memory. He tightened his fingers, then released. And suddenly, Rook froze, his breathing hitched, and then, from the corner of one eye, a single tear welled, not a stream, but it trembled. And it was real. Jonas didn't ask, didn't speak. He sat back against the cold cement wall, one hand still resting on Rook's shoulder. They stayed like that. Didn't care about the wind. Didn't care about the frozen floor. Didn't care that morning was coming. Some wounds don't bleed, but they shake your whole body with pain. And some nightmares don't wait until you're asleep. They come when you're wide awake, and remembering everything you wish you could forget. When Jonas opened his eyes, the sun was already up. Rook lay beside him. No more tremors, but his eyes were still wide open, staring at the door, like he was afraid it might vanish if he blinked. Jonas got up. The kettle was whistling. He poured 2 mugs, one for himself, the other placed carefully next to Rook's food tray, not because the dog needed coffee, but as a quiet ritual, a way to say, "We're still here, together." Around 8, the sound of tires crunching on gravel stopped outside the garage. Not loud, not rushed, but unmistakably not the mail truck. Jonas stepped outside. A man stood at the edge of the drive. Brown coat, low-brim cap, sunglasses. He didn't say his name, didn't offer a wallet or badge, just handed over a plain white envelope and walked away. Jonas watched him go. No license plate, not strange, just suspicious in the kind of way that felt too familiar. Inside the envelope was a black USB stick. No logo, no label, no "watch this," no threat, no explanation, just silence. Jonas plugged it into his old laptop. The screen went dark for a few seconds, then flashed a single line. Tactical simulation footage. Urban Echo Ops. The video started. A simulation house. Worn wood floors. Shattered glass. Tactical lights cutting through the dust. The camera was head-mounted. Footage from 3 perspectives. 2 soldiers and 1 K9 unit tagged R-71. Rook. In the video, Rook wasn't leashed. He led the formation. Steady pace. No barking. A commander's voice cracked through comms. Alpha formation. No targets spared. Rook stopped at a door. His tail dropped. Nose hovered over a floor crack. He didn't move forward. A soldier behind barked a command. "Engage, R-71. Clear the room." But Rook didn't budge. He took half a step back, then turned to look straight at his handler. No growl. No sound. Just refusal. Another soldier pushed into the room ahead. In the flashlight beam, a child, a girl, maybe 7, hiding under the bed, clutching a pillow, dirt across her cheeks. The commander's voice roared over the speaker. "Abort! Abort mission! Civilians in AO, I repeat, stand down!" The screen cut out, then flickered back on. Now a concrete room, cold, sterile. Rook, chained by all 4 limbs. A technician adjusted an electroshock unit attached to the back of his neck. Rook growled, scratched the floor. Then came that voice. Icy, too familiar. The voice of Lieutenant Colonel Brass. Subject R-71 exhibits behavioral deviation. Independently deemed mission order unethical. This surpasses acceptable parameters. Final order, erase. The video faded to black. One final line appeared, in jagged red ink. It doesn't just remember, it chose. Jonas pulled the USB out. His hand wouldn't stop shaking. He turned toward Rook. The dog still sat near the wall, watching, waiting, not for food, not for orders, just waiting to be seen. Jonas didn't ask a single question. He only repeated that last line, barely a whisper. It chose. Rook turned toward him, and for the first time since their first meeting, those eyes weren't hollow. They were awake. The wind scraped against the garage door. Rain tapped softly on the tin roof like fingertips on glass. Jonas stood there for a long time, not afraid anymore, not even close. What he felt now ran deeper, a fierce mix of rage, sorrow, and something harder to name. Something that burned hot in the chest and had nothing to do with justice, and everything to do with love. He thought of the child hiding under that bed, of how Rook stepped back, of the moment that changed everything, a head turned away from orders toward something purer. No one teaches a dog to do that. No one teaches a creature to step between a gun and a little girl. No one can program compassion. Jonas stepped closer, sat down on the floor, eye level with Rook. Rook didn't flinch, didn't pull away, just stared back. There was no fear in those eyes, no obedience either, only waiting, waiting for judgment, waiting for a decision. Jonas reached out and placed a hand gently on Rook's chest. He could feel the breath rise and fall, the heartbeat, the small, involuntary shiver of skin stirred by memory. He whispered, just loud enough for the 2 of them. "You chose. And so will I." That night, Jonas didn't lock the door, didn't turn on the lights. He just cleared out a corner of the garage, laid down a fresh blanket beside his own bed. Rook didn't come in right away. But when Jonas lay down, back turned, no calling, no signaling, just left the space open. 5 minutes later, there was a soft shuffle of paws. Then, a long sigh. Rook laid down. Not too close, not too far, just enough for Jonas to feel his warmth. And for Rook to feel something else entirely trust. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But they both knew this. They weren't alone anymore. And from now on, there was no other choice but to hold tight to the one thing that made a creature refuse to follow orders, not out of defiance, but because it had learned to see right from wrong. And to Jonas, that was reason enough to protect it, no matter what. Because if compassion was the very thing that got Rook discarded, then it would be the very reason Jonas would die defending it. That night, there was no rain. But the wind howled like a warning. By 9 o'clock, Jonas already knew something wasn't right. Not because of a noise, but because of the silence. Unnatural, too still. Rook wasn't asleep by the door like usual. Instead, Rook was circling the garage, once, twice, 3 times. Nose low, tail stiff, ears locked upright. Eyes unblinking. Jonas didn't say a word. He walked into the small surveillance room. The camera system wasn't military grade, just a basic setup from last year. 4 angles: front door, back, side entrance, and the roof line. He rewound to 8:30 p.m., and the air caught in his lungs. Camera 3, the rear door. A shadow moved. Not a break-in. No lock tampered with. The door simply opened. Quiet, effortless. A man dressed head to toe in black. Gloves, number logos. A smooth, featureless mask. He didn't carry a bag, didn't touch anything else. He just knelt near the back wall, right where Jonas had once hidden the old control junction. From inside his coat, the man pulled a small device, pressed it into the circuit box, stood, left. The whole thing lasted under 40 seconds. No sound, no signs of damage, no threat, just the planting of something. Small, swift, precise. Jonas froze the frame. Rook was already behind him, watching, not barking. Eyes red-rimmed, jaw tight. Jonas pulled his gun from the cabinet. Didn't speak. Then he reached under the desk, pulled out a knife, an old military rescue blade. The only thing he still carried from the days that now felt like someone else's life. The overhead bulb caught the steel as he turned. And at that exact moment, Rook made a sound. Not a growl, not a whimper. Just a single long exhale through the nose, a signal. Jonas understood. This wasn't a stranger. It was a process. The first step, before the real storm hits. He opened the circuit box. There it was, a device no larger than a fingertip, tucked right into the motherboard. No blinking light, no buzz. But it had started counting. Jonas didn't smash it, didn't throw it out. He slipped it into a lead-lined box hidden in the metal cabinet. Because he knew this game. What stays quiet is often what kills you. What's installed isn't always meant to explode. Sometimes it just watches. Jonas grabbed his keys, wrapped the charging cord around his wrist, slid the pistol under the passenger seat. Rook jumped into the truck bed without waiting for a command. Whenever Jonas returned to Elliot, it was for one reason. Answers. This time, he needed a damn good one. They reached the familiar shack, but the door didn't open. No light, no rattling gate, no barking from the shepherd mutt Elliot usually kept around. Just wind whistling through a cracked chimney flue. Jonas stepped out, gun drawn. The door creaked open unlocked. Untouched, but the hinges were freshly oiled. Inside, emptiness. No Elliot, no shotgun, no burn of old powder, only a long, dry smear of blood dragging from the desk towards the steel cabinet in the back. Not fresh, dusted. Cracked. Jonas moved slow, his hand brushed across the desk. There, wedged beneath a stack of scrap notes and scattered components on the desk, a small Ziploc bag. Clear, untouched, almost deliberately placed. Inside, 3 black and white photographs and a torn sheet of paper faded along the edges. The first photo. Rook, but not the Rook Jonas knew. This was Rook in full tactical armor, gear strapped to the spine, a neural node embedded at the base of the neck, eyes vacant, body locked stiff, more machine than soul. The second, a training profile, reaction time, pathing algorithms, moral recognition capacity, The last line, autonomous ethical override, slashed through in red ink. The third, a candid shot. Rook and Elliot years ago standing in front of Alpha Training Center. Elliot looked younger, less gray, more upright. But the eyes? Those hadn't changed. Tucked between the prints, a torn notepad scrap. One line, blue ink. All uppercase. Don't trust anyone who's ever been inside the system, including me. Jonas stepped back, folded the paper, slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. The dried blood. The unlocked door. No struggle. Elliot didn't walk out. He was taken. Not for interrogation, for erasure. Outside, Rook was half raised on the truck bed, ears fixed, eyes locked on the woods behind the house. No barking, no growling, just stillness. The kind of stillness that knew how to measure danger. As Jonas reversed down the gravel road, he glanced back. No one stood in the doorway. No dogs barked, no signs of life, only a sick certainty in his chest. Whoever had stepped into their lives wasn't just after Rook. They wanted every trace of the choice Rook made, gone. The moment they returned to the garage, Jonas didn't speak. He didn't look at the cameras, didn't flip on the lights. He walked straight into the control room. One by one, he disconnected every cable, ripped out each recorder, dismantled the router, the landline, the Wi-Fi antenna. Gone. All that remained was a low-frequency radio encased in lead shielding, and a wire-thick, old-school analog. Then he went into storage, pulled out a roll of brittle blueprints drawn by his father when the garage was still a mechanic's dream. The lines were fading, but one mark stood out. Southwest corner. Under 12 centimeters of concrete, an old utility cavity, abandoned after a flood in '93. Jonas grabbed the drill. Rook didn't bark, didn't question. He just stood behind Jonas, ears up, eyes darting between every shadow. 3 hours in, the floor cracked. A patch of earth opened up moist, metallic, rich with the smell of rust. Jonas dug fast, built a wooden frame, anchored lights, carved out a pocket just large enough for a man and a dog to lie shoulder to shoulder. Not a hiding place. A last stand. He worked in silence, no curses, no muttering, like a man who had done this before. By nightfall, Jonas pushed the radio into the corner of the cavity, tuned to a forgotten band, just static. Then, something broke through. Wind and a voice, distant, warped, but unmistakable. They are coming. Jonas didn't sleep. He wiped down the Glock, sorted the knives, inspected each round like it might be his last. Rook didn't sleep either. The German shepherd lay close, chest rising but never relaxed, eyes open, unblinking. 2 lives. Both once marked defective, both labeled too unstable, too broken to trust. Now gearing up for their first war. No orders, no chain of command, only a bond tested by fire, and a name once erased now spoken with conviction, louder than any command ever given. Rook. 3 a.m. on the dusty monitor, hooked directly into the radio's secure line, a single line flickered to life. No IP, no trace, just 4 words. I am Zane. Jonas froze. The name had never appeared in Elliot's records, not once in Mercer's decrypted chip files. But something about it made Jonas's stomach clench, like cold steel. He typed back, "Who the hell are you?" The reply came instantly. "Doesn't matter. I once wrote code. I once believed in what Helix 9 was trying to build." Jonas narrowed his eyes. His fingers hovered close to the pistol. Zane continued. "But then I saw what they did to them. To Rook, to the others, and I chose not to be part of it anymore." Jonas responded sharply. "I'm not here for confessions." "It's not a confession, it's proof." 3 minutes later, a faint thump landed outside the side entrance. Rook shot up. shoulders tight, back bristling, but didn't charge. Instead, Rook stepped in front of Jonas. Solid, silent, a living shield. Jonas moved to the side panel, the one no cameras touched. He cracked it open. No footsteps, no shadows, just a package. Small, sealed in aluminum foil and anti-static wrap, left like a whisper in the cold. Jonas picked it up, set it on the bench inside. On the cover, a handwritten note. If you still want to believe, don't open this. If you've chosen to fight, plug it in. This is the only help I'll give. He looked at Rook. The German Shepherd didn't flinch, didn't blink, only stared at the drive, like it was something Rook had seen before, or maybe remembered. Jonas slid the device into an isolated laptop, one he'd never connected to any network. The same laptop that still held the final journal entries from his late wife. The screen flickered. A folder appeared. Helix 9//Legacy. Jonas opened it. Dozens of files, video logs, encrypted transcripts, trial notes, test outcomes. Rook's name, over and over again, buried in lines of code meant to disappear. But nothing made Jonas rise from his seat like the last video. A dark room. Rook. 3 chains. Eyes wide with panic. Across the room, a small child, shoved in, barefoot, crying. A voice crackled from an unseen speaker. Unit 71, eliminate! Rook snarled, but didn't attack. He lunged, not at the child, but in front of her, digging claws into concrete, throwing himself into the metal door, trying to shield her with his own body. The video cut out. Jonas stared at the blank screen, then turned slowly. Rook hadn't moved. No growl, no sound. But in those eyes, not a dog. A soul betrayed. Jonas plugged the drive into a hidden OS partition and entered the encryption key Zane had embedded in his message. The directory expanded. Phase Y recording .movemodification protocol.pdf-9, unit evaluation dash, red termination logs, confidential personal directive, 009-gen DAWs. Jonas clicked the first log. Grainy footage loaded. A different dog, K942, forced into a sealed testing room. Strobe lights, sirens, instructions screamed from speakers. But this wasn't a reflex test. It was a moral test. Each target in the room was human. An elderly woman, a child, a man holding a white flag. Every time the dog attacked on command, the screen flashed, passed. If it refused, just 2 words, recall and reprogram. Jonas scrolled further. A folder named Terminated Units opened, revealing over 30 K9 unit codes. Most were stamped with a bold red destroyed. Only one stood without confirmation. K971, Rook. Jonas clicked on the last file. Personal Directive 009-GENDAWES, a simple scan. Red ink still vivid. From General Marcus Dawes, Director, Helix 9. Date, March 12, 2022, Special Disposition Division. Subject, K971. Rook, refusal of termination order during live field operation. While Programming Division confirms no hardware faults, the behavior described as autonomous moral evaluation exceeds the program's intended capacity. Orders: remove all monitoring equipment, erase federal system data, wipe behavioral memory. If reinitialization fails, terminate signed, General M. Dawes red stamp, order executed 14.3, termination unconfirmed. Jonas leaned back, his breath caught in his throat, not because of the order, but because of that last line. Termination unconfirmed. It meant, even when the system believed Rook was gone, someone inside had defied the order. Someone had hidden him. Someone had believed Rook deserved to live. Jonas turned. Rook was lying beside him now, his head gently resting on Jonas's leg, eyes wide open. No fear, no shame, only stillness, like Rook knew. Jonas understood everything, and in Jonas's chest, doubt was gone. The fog had cleared. This dog wasn't defective. He wasn't a broken weapon. He was the only one in the entire program who had chosen to do the right thing. Jonas's fingers moved across the keyboard of an old laptop, the same laptop that once stored handwritten letters from his late wife. The same one that held the last remnants of a life lost in a fire. Now, it would carry the truth. He linked into a ghost network. Dead servers reactivated across Europe, South America, and a half-buried node once used by deep web journalists. Through those tunnels, he sent one payload: the entire Helix 9 archive, video, audio, logs, scans, Zane's evidence, his own surveillance. A single file name. choiceisreal.zip. At the same time, Jonas played back the audio message Zane had included. His voice trembled. If you're hearing this, it means they've found me. They're not coming for me. They're coming for what you're holding. But Jonas, listen to me. Every empire built on lies fears one thing most: a living witness. Jonas froze. His eyes shifted toward the garage door. Rook was sitting by it, ears perked, muscles tense, gaze locked toward the back field. No bark. But he knew. Jonas stood, closed the laptop, slid the hard drive into a lead-lined pouch, then dragged the metal sheet across the mouth of the tunnel he'd dug the night before. Not a bunker, a control station. From inside, he could manually monitor every entry point. No Wi-Fi, no radio signals, just wires, steel, and resolve. A fortress built from sweat, instinct, and everything the world had thrown away. Jonas looked Rook in the eyes. If they come, you don't protect me. Just survive, okay? Rook didn't bark, didn't growl. He stepped forward and gently laid his head on Jonas's hand. One movement, no hesitation, not a command. A choice. Jonas nodded. He strapped on his old ballistic vest, snapped the mag into his sidearm, and checked the ancient smoke grenades left over from his rescue unit days Rook hadn't changed. No armor, no gear, no collar, just thick fur and a fading scar beneath it all. But the real weapon was in his eyes. 12:03 a.m. The signal light behind the garage blinked 3 times. There was a car, no license plate. No one stepped out. No door opened. But they were here. Jonas placed his finger on the trigger. "This is my home," he whispered, his voice steady, tired but unshaken. "And you're the reason I'm still breathing." Rook let out a low growl, not frantic, not afraid. His eyes locked forward, deep into the dark outside the window. Right here, right now, 2 beings once labeled as broken chose to stand in the light, even if what was coming through that door wasn't justice. It was revenge. 10:43 p.m. The first sound sliced through the silence like metal scraping asphalt. Slow, steady, cold. Jonas didn't move. He stood frozen in the dark, his entire body strung tight like a wire. Rook had already taken position, eyes locked on the back door. Then came a sharp click from the circuit panel. The thermal alarm. Gone. A second later, the monitors flickered once, then blacked out. No more cameras, no more signals, just instinct. Jonas nudged the metal floor panel, the hatch, opened with no sound. Rook jumped down first, no command needed. Jonas followed, hauling the pack. Hard drives, 2 shotguns, a fire axe, and the old rusted wrench his father gave him back in his mechanic days. With a pull of the lever, the hatch sealed shut behind them. The lock echoed like the final period at the end of a book no one wanted to write. The bunker was narrow, barely 6 meters long, concrete walls, and 2 side exits leading into the woods. But Jonas wasn't planning to run. Not tonight. 11 p.m. A pale light beamed through the garage window from a distance. Armored vehicle. Jonas peered through a makeshift lens fitted into the old vent shaft. 3 figures, All black, faces masked, no insignia. Their gear was sleek, their movements silent. Not a rescue, not a raid. This was removal. The lights in the bunker turned red. Stealth mode. Rook crept toward exit route 2, the one that led behind the garage. Jonas followed, silent as smoke, heart pulsing with iron, sorrow, and something deeper, something fierce. He no longer felt fear, only one question. Where would they strike first? 11:05 p.m., a clank. The front door caved under hydraulic pressure. A hiss, then silence. Jonas held his breath. No gunfire, no shouting. They entered like they owned the place. But they forgot one thing. Nothing belongs to those who try to erase what's right. Jonas nodded once. Rook understood. He stepped back, near the rear exit, waiting. Jonas stepped into the red light, shotgun in hand, the barrel catching the faintest glint. "You were the right choice," he whispered, "and tonight, I choose to defend it." Footsteps echoed, metal on concrete, hollow and cruel. Smoke hissed under the crack of the garage door, acrid and sharp, not standard issue. Jonas yanked up his mask, squeezed the trigger. The first shot shattered the silence. A scream. One of them dropped, slammed into the welding rig. Another slid in from the left, rolled into firing position, silencer aimed straight at Jonas. Everything slowed. The muzzle was a heartbeat away. Rook moved. Not a growl. Not a bark. Just a blur of motion. A living missile. Teeth locked onto the attacker's wrist, pulled him back. Gun clattered across the floor. Jonas spun in time to see Rook flip the man, pin him flat with both front legs. No kill bite, no rage, just restraint. Like he was trained. But this wasn't programming. It was a choice. Glass shattered overhead. Another intruder. From above. Jonas couldn't turn in time. The shot ripped through his shoulder. Just one. But enough. He fell sideways. Shotgun dropped. Blood poured through his worn flannel. Rook turned, eyes blazing red, but he didn't lunge. Jonas, eyes barely open, whispered, "No. Don't kill." Rook understood. He circled, flanked, and struck from the blind side, slamming into the shooter's ribs so hard the man flew back, cracked his skull against the car lift's steel column. The man hit the ground, unconscious. Not a single bite, not a scratch, just the sound of a growl. This time not at an enemy, but like a warning. To whoever was still out there, watching. Then came the fire. One of the attackers had triggered a backup trap. A bottle of Molotov smashed near the oil drums, and within seconds, flames were racing toward Jonas. Rook leapt in, snatching Jonas's backpack and dragging it away from the heat. Jonas gritted his teeth. His right hand was bleeding, his left held a rusted hammer. He dragged himself inch by inch toward the far end of the bunker. Behind him, the fire climbed the wooden beams, licking toward the ceiling. A shout. Another figure emerged from the side tunnel. Rook blocked the way, standing between Jonas and the threat. The man froze. Not from fear of being attacked, but because he'd never seen a K9 stare at him like that. Not like a beast, like a being. He backed away, didn't raise his weapon. He turned and ran. The flames neared the backpack, its fabric starting to smoke. Jonas shouted, voice hoarse, "Rook, the bag!" Rook obeyed instantly, biting into the strap, yanking it back toward Jonas. With one last roll, Jonas and Rook dove into the hatch, pulling the bag in just as the ceiling above them collapsed. A roar, a crash. The garage, gone. Smoke poured down. But in the dark, a faint red beam from Jonas's headlamp flickered on. He gasped for breath. Rook stood beside him, silent, alert, singed fur on his shoulder, eyes locked forward. He didn't whimper, didn't growl, just looked at Jonas, like asking, "Now what?" Jonas smiled, even through the pain. "We're still alive," he whispered, and they're gonna regret that. In the distance, the whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter blades, not military thunder, slower, rounder, like clapping from the sky. Rook lifted his head. Ears up, breath steady. Lights, dozens of them, pierced through the trees. Jonas crawled toward the hatch's edge, nudged open the steel lid. A spotlight beamed down on him. But this time, no weapons followed, just voices and camera shutters. Up above, the armored truck had turned away. No sirens, no alarms. But the eye of the sky, the helicopter's camera, had already captured everything. Local broadcast signals had been hijacked. And now the world saw what no one had ever shown. A malfunctioned K-9 fighting not to kill, but to protect. Not attacking. Not executing. Just standing between a bullet and a man. Somewhere far away, Zane leaned back from 3 screens. He smiled, quietly, fingers still tapping with surgical rhythm. The data dump from Helix 9 was spreading like wildfire across hidden servers, 9 nations deep. No one could erase it now. Above ground, Jonas knelt in the light, arms raised, shoulder bleeding, clothes burned, but his eyes unbroken. Rook stepped forward past Jonas. No growl, no snarl, just stillness, in front of hundreds of flashing lenses, dozens of weapons, and a forest full of silence. He looked, not like a survivor, but like a truth. A female reporter pushed past security, shouting over the din, "Sir, do you have anything to say? That dog? Did he save your life?" Jonas, swaying, stood up slowly. Blood dripped down his sleeve. His voice was rough, but clear. "No. He didn't save my life." Everyone froze. Jonas looked at Rook. "He taught me how to live." The helicopter faded into the horizon. The armored truck vanished. No one dared follow, because now all the lights had turned toward this place. All the cameras had chosen their side. A medic dropped to treat Jonas. A reporter knelt beside Rook, gently patting his shoulder. Then, a small child broke through the barrier, hand outstretched. Rook bowed his head. Slowly. Eyes closed, not out of command, not from training, but because Rook wanted to. Across social media, millions watched the moment unfold live. A single headline burned across. The screen. Rook, the dog who chose compassion. Jonas didn't fully understand the hashtags. He didn't know what it meant for the algorithm to launch his name and Rook's to the #1 spot nationwide. But he knew one thing. Sometimes, a single right choice could light up 1,000 eyes that once looked away. And today, in a packed hall in the heart of the capital, Rook was lying quietly at Jonas's feet. No leash, no muzzle, no whispered commands to keep him still. Just trust and the pounding of Jonas's heart, loud like a drumbeat beneath his ribs. The host called him to the stage. Jonas didn't wear a suit, just a wrinkled white shirt with a stain of dried blood that hadn't come out, faded jeans, and eyes that hadn't known a full night's sleep in 3 days. He stepped up. The spotlight hit him dead on. The crowd fell silent. "I'm not a hero," Jonas said. His voice was rough, short, director. "I'm just a mechanic who walked into a kill center looking for something that still had a heartbeat." He paused, looked down at Rook, who lay beside him, ears forward, eyes focused on every word. "And I found him." A stir moved through the room. Someone quietly wiped their eyes. A creature trained to kill, who chose not to, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. Jonas drew a slow breath. Because he saw a child. And instead of following orders, he stood still. No one taught him that. No one wired morality into his head. "So I ask you," he looked around the room, "what is it then, that made a being with no rights, no voice, know when to stop?" Silence swept through the audience like a broken dam. No one answered. Jonas knelt and placed his hand on Rook's back. That is what we call a conscience. The applause started in one corner, soft, hesitant, but it spread like fire catching dry grass. The entire room rose, applause swelled, it didn't stop. A female senator stepped forward, eyes glassy with emotion. "Mr. Jonas Whitaker," she said, voice trembling just slightly, "on behalf of this community, we thank you, and on behalf of those who never got the chance to speak their truth, thank you for preserving what was right." Jonas didn't reply. He just nodded, then turned back to where Rook waited. Rook stood, as if he knew it was time, and as the crowd gently made space for them, a man and a dog without a leash, without a nameplate. This wasn't just a hall anymore. It was a witness, not granted by law, not certified by ranks, but by the eyes of those watching. 1 month later, Jonas rebuilt the garage. New beams replaced the scorched posts. The walls were painted with fireproof, bullet-resistant coating. But one thing he left untouched: a single dark burn mark shaped like a paw print in the entryway. "That spot," he told the young man helping him, "stays open." Inside, where once had been a bunker, a last refuge, it was now a bright, warm, peaceful room. Not for Rook, but for others like Rook, the discarded canines, the ones stamped unsalvageable. At the center of that room, the first photo was hung. Not of Jonas, not of the night the garage burned, but a blurry, half-burnt image printed from an old USB clip. In it, a young girl, maybe 8 years old, hair falling across her face, curled up under a bed, foreheads touched fur. Not just any fur, but Rook's, the dog who once stood between a child and the barrel of a gun. She had been found. Not by some elite task force, not by a government alert, but through a nameless post on an old survivors forum. Living memory. A space where people once hidden by classified operations dared to speak. The girl, now a young woman, stood in the soft gold light outside the garage. No words were needed. Rook came out first. No command, no leash. He walked slowly, didn't bark. He simply lowered his head and lay down, resting his chin gently on her feet. Just like 10 years ago. She knelt beside him. Her hand moved down his spine, stroke by stroke, as if her fingers still remembered where the scars were buried beneath his coat. "I missed you," she whispered. Rook didn't move, but his eyes closed. A single tear slid from the girl's lashes, landing softly on Rook's brow. Not the tear of a witness, but the tear of someone who had once been forgiven. That night, Jonas didn't say much. He simply stood at a distance, watching two souls, one from a world of blood and silence, the other from a world of shadows and survival, now sitting side by side. No explanations, no accusations, just continuation. The next morning the snow had stopped falling. The sky stretched clear like an untouched lake. Sunlight poured across the wooden porch in front of the garage, where Jonas sat with a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The warmth didn't matter. His eyes weren't on the cup. They were on the ground, where Rook lay curled beside him, head on his leg, eyes closed, breathing calm. On Rook's chest, no serial number, no barcode, no trace of the system that once tried to erase him. Only a small brass tag, hand-carved by Jonas. Italic letters. Simple. Rook. "You know," Jonas murmured, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder, "I used to think I was the one who rescued you." Rook flicked an ear, didn't open his eyes. "But now I know. You're the one who saved me. You pulled me out of myself." In the distance, the sound of cars pulling in. Not the police, not the press, but the first wave of people who had signed up for the program Jonas and the girl had founded. The Redemption Kennel, a haven for K9S rejected by the system. Not a place for obedience, a place for choice. Jonas stood, looked around at the land that once held a burned-down garage. Now it was home, a sanctuary for scarred hearts that never gave up. Rook rose too. No call needed. Side by side, they stepped down into the light. A new day began, not promised to be easy, but no longer steeped in darkness, and for Jonas, that was enough. Because sometimes the ending isn't where everything stops. It's where everything finally begins again. There are wounds you'll never see, but they can be healed. By a loyal gaze, a quiet touch, and a four-legged heart that has never known betrayal. German Shepherds aren't just intelligent, powerful dogs. They are living proof of what our modern world is losing: conviction, compassion, the courage to choose what's right, even if it hurts. Rook, once labeled useless, became living proof that true worth isn't defined by compliance, but by the strength to stand for life. If you're watching this video, please remember, sometimes the only thing that can save a human soul doesn't come from another human, but from a creature who can't speak, yet loves you more than life itself. Love animals. And if a dog has ever trusted you, never treat that as ordinary, because to them, you are everything. The February wind slipped through the cracks of the long-distance bus, carrying with it the chill of a countryside with no sea, only silence and absence. Reedsall stepped off at the final station, his worn-out military boots still dusted with soil from places no one asked about, and he never offered. One hand held a backpack, the other dragged a scuffed suitcase with a frayed handle. Reed stood still in the open courtyard of the small terminal, letting the cold soak through every thread of fabric, every vein, every unstitched memory. The old town hadn't changed much in 13 months. The narrow asphalt streets were still uneven. The wooden houses with slanted roofs remained. The street lamps still lit up earlier than needed, as if afraid of the dark staying too long. Reed walked past all of it, quiet as the shadow of his own past. There were no greetings, no cheers, only the soft crunch of wheels on pavement, the wind whistling through tree canopies, and his footsteps tapping an invisible rhythm across familiar ground. The old house sat at the edge of the neighborhood, where the sounds of cars faded, and birdsong filled the morning air. Reed stopped before the warped wooden gate. The once white fence was now peeling, revealing weathered planks like the skin of the elderly. He drew in a deep breath, hand resting on the latch. But he didn't open it. Not because it was locked, but because he hesitated. The house was silent, the glass windows fogged with dust. Weeds overtook the stone path. The wooden porch swing had lost one of its ropes and swayed gently in the wind without anyone sitting. Reed called out softly, "Mom? Dad?" Only echoes replied. No voices. He circled to the side, where the old back door used to jam every summer. When he was young, a light shoulder bump would pop it open. This time it slid open too easily, as if no one had touched it for a long, long time. Inside was a world suspended in time. Dust coated every surface. The couch still sat in its usual place, but the cushions had fallen to the floor. Crooked family photos hung on the wall. The dining table was bare. The kitchen cabinets hung half open, revealing shelves as empty as unanswered questions. Reed moved step by step, each one light yet heavy. Every corner, every muted sound, every faint shaft of light through the curtains felt like they were waiting for someone, or had long since given up waiting. He didn't know when his parents had left. No message, no email. Phone calls fell into silence. Letters went unanswered. Amid the chaos of distant deployments, Reed had believed that when he returned, everything would still be here, imperfect but intact. But it wasn't. Only the empty house remained, a name in a military file. and him. He dropped his backpack beside the doorway, then just stood there as if undecided whether to step in or turn away. Almost on instinct, he walked toward the back, past the rear door, where his mother used to tend her rose garden. Now only knee-high weeds remained, choking the paths. A torn garden net hung across the fence. The wind hissed through rotting wood. And then, a sound. Small, hoarse, broken. A whimper. Reed froze. He turned, scanning the backyard, now touched by the last traces of twilight. In a shadowed corner, where the old kennel leaned between two thick trees, he saw a shape. The kennel tilted, nearly collapsed. Boards had fallen off, the pale green paint a mere ghost of its former self. And deep in the darkest corner, something moved. He clicked on the small flashlight attached to his keychain. The thin beam lit up a hunched form, a curled-up body, ribs protruding like iron rods, patches of fur long gone, leaving only rough, dirt-caked skin. A hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle, but the eyes, cloudy as they were, looked straight at him. Reed stepped forward. Slowly, as if walking toward a version of himself he had forgotten. In the trembling light, he saw the old collar around the creature's neck, rusted, cracked, but still bearing a single word. Shape. His heart stopped. Shape, the dog he had raised from the first days of enlistment. Not just a pet, a companion, the only one who shared his bed the night before deployment. The first being who curled beside him when he trembled on his first night home from the front. The one who never asked, never judged, only stayed, on time for meals, silent when needed, and present precisely when Reed no longer believed he was still human. Shape was the soul that taught him how to stay calm through panic. When the explosions in his head wouldn't stop, when darkness refused to lift, only Shape stayed, pressed beside him, still, breathing slow, watching him, watching until Reed could bear to look at himself again, without fear. The day he received new orders, Reed couldn't take Shape along. A kind neighbor had promised to care for him. Reed had believed. He had kissed Shape on the forehead and whispered, "I'll come back. Wait for me." Then he left, and now this form, that name, lay curled like a fading shadow in the corner of a forgotten yard. Reed dropped to his knees before his mind could catch up. "Shape," he whispered. Not as a call, but as if to remind himself that this was real, that memory wasn't deceiving him, that what was happening wasn't a midday nightmare. Shape lifted his head, slowly, painfully. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He only breathed, heavy and thin, like the final wisp of smoke in a cold room. Then he moved, not with the eager spring of old times, but with the drag of sheer will, inch by inch, tremble by tremble. The rear of his body no longer responded. But still, he tried. Somehow he dragged himself forward until his dry nose touched the tip of Reed's boot. And then, with what seemed like the very last flicker of consciousness, Shape pressed his head against Reed's leg. Not to beg, not to plead, but as if to say, "I know you. I've waited, and now I'm here." His tail gave a small wag just once, then went still. Reed broke, not in tears, but in the silent, violent scream of a heart tearing open. He gathered Shape into his arms, gently as one would hold a fragile spine. The dog's breath came in fragments, his chest rising and falling in painful labor. Reed whispered, "I left you behind, but you waited. You really waited for me." Then he rose, hands trembling, eyes burning, feet running, across the overgrown yard, through the gate, down the street where no lights shone anymore. His fingers dialed emergency as he cradled Shape against his chest. like holding a memory that had never been healed. The story had never ended. It was only now beginning. In that weak, broken whimper, Reed knew something was still alive. And the only thing he could do was not let it die again. Shape lay quietly in Reed's arms like an old rag, weightless, almost without form. Under the faint beam of the flashlight, his body no longer resembled a dog, but a twisted remnant of survival, of hunger, of being forgotten. Reed knelt in the tall, tangled grass, his own breath faltering, heart clenched at the shiver that passed through Shape's frail body. That name, Shape, faded on the rusted collar, only part of the word still visible, as if time itself had tried to erase what people lacked the courage to remember. But Reed had recognized it instantly. Unmistakable, undeniable, an old collar with faded letters, now the last proof of an unfinished promise. In a world where the small things are often forgotten, that name had held a fragment of soul no one else had the strength to hold on to. Shape, no longer just the name of a dog, but a vow, a reminder, the visible form of something once spoken and never completed. Reed had given him that name on a rainy afternoon at base, when a red dust-covered puppy sat shivering inside his military jacket. In those early days of service, Reed hadn't yet adapted to the sound of commands, boots pounding, or the breathless sprints through endless drills. But when he returned to his room, a small creature was always waiting, eyes wide, ears drooping, as if the world outside held no fear, so long as something was still waiting inside. He used to dream. Not often, but just enough to remember. In those light naps between shifts, he saw a shadow passing through rooms filled with smoke. At first he thought it was a hallucination. But when he opened his eyes, the pup was there. Same spot, same shape, as if stepping out of that dream. Eventually, Reed stopped calling him Pup or Little Guy. He needed a name, not to summon him, but to acknowledge he existed. Shape. Not because of how he looked, but because to Reed he was the first form of peace he could touch after drifting for so long through exhaustion and confusion. He was the shape that made the cold room meaningful, the unchanging shape in a world where everything else could disappear. The name was simple, abrupt, but carried something unspoken. Once, a fellow soldier asked, "Why that weird name?" Reed had only smiled. Because it was the only thing I could recognize when I couldn't recognize myself. Shape wasn't only there during the gentle moments. He existed when Reed panicked, when homesickness clawed at him, when a letter from home arrived too late, and when his mind filled only with the static of things broken beyond repair. Shape didn't soothe. He existed. And sometimes, that was all it took. One night Reed couldn't sleep. He sat curled at the edge of his bunk, the oil lamp casting long shadows. Shape crawled over, laid his chin on Reed's knee, and didn't move. Reed ran a slow hand down his back, and for the first time understood what presence without demand meant. Shape didn't need to know war, didn't need to hear the unspeakable. He just needed to be there. And somehow, that healed more than any advice ever could. Reed had once promised himself he wouldn't get attached while in the military. Everything felt too temporary, too easily lost, but he still filled out the registration form listing Shape as his companion, still took him for vaccinations, still bought that first collar, dark brown leather, hand-carved with the word Shape, crooked but honest. That collar now hung around the neck of a creature Reed had barely recognized. Rusty, worn, its letters peeling away. But all Reed needed was a trace. A faint curve of the letter S was enough to flood his mind with memories like a dam breaking. And in that moment, he understood. It wasn't time that tried to blur it. It was people who tried to forget. Shape never did. That name, like a story left untold, a chapter left unfinished, a promise never fulfilled but still believed. Because to Shape, Shape wasn't just a name. It was a signal, a sign that he belonged to someone, and he would wait until that signal was answered. But Reed had left. One March day. Last year. Amid sirens and hurried orders, beneath the guilt in his eyes as he climbed into the military vehicle, Reed had entrusted Shape to the neighbor of his parents, a man who once spoiled the dog, who once swore he would care for him like his own. Reed believed, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had to. Because without belief, he wouldn't have been able to cross that line between war and peace. And then 13 months passed. No word, no answer, no concrete reason to doubt, and no one to ask, until this very moment, when all those memories came crashing down in one breathless instant. When those clouded eyes looked into his, as if they had never stopped waiting. Reed trembled as he stood, gathering Shape into his arms. His body was terrifyingly light, his bones visible beneath dry, stretched skin, scratches unhealed, a hind leg twisted unnaturally, dried blood caked along his tail and hips. Reed dared not speak, afraid that if he did, the moment would shatter like a dream too fragile to exist. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a low battery warning. He quickly dialed the emergency vet hotline, his voice hoarse and broken. "There's a dog, abandoned. He's dying. I need help. Now please don't ask questions. Just send someone." The operator responded with a voice so calm it felt inhuman. Reed didn't remember what he said next. Only that he wrapped Shape in his jacket and ran, across the yard, through the rusted gate, nearly a full kilometer through darkness. No car, no light. Only a heart pounding loud enough to drown the world. By the time he reached the clinic, Shape had gone limp. His head rested in the crook of Reed's arm. His breaths were like torn threads, thin, uneven. Outside, night had fallen. But Reed couldn't feel anything except the hammering of his own pulse and the thud of his boots on the cold pavement. The veterinary clinic was a small house tucked at the end of an old street. Its wooden sign was faded. The glass door rattled with every gust of wind. No one should have been there at that hour. Except one person had stayed. A woman. Silver hair pulled into a bun at the nape of her neck, a worn white coat, reading glasses low on her nose. She opened the door before Reed could knock. Didn't ask, didn't act surprised. Her eyes met his, not with pity, but with the look of someone who had once known pain. "Come in," she said, her voice low but steady. Reed hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, nodding his thanks. She led him down a short hallway into a small exam room. Dim lights, the scent of antiseptic and aged wood. No fancy machines, just a cold steel table and a few worn tools. But each of her movements was precise, silent. "Sure." "Put him here, gently," she instructed. Reed laid Shape down. He was so light, so cold. Every time Reed touched his skin, it felt like brushing the edge of a memory already fading. But the vet's hands didn't tremble. She placed a stethoscope to his chest, frowned, then checked his eyes, gums, reflexes. Her hands were soft as wind, her voice steady, almost like prayer. "He's fragile, but it's not too late. His heart is still beating. There's still a chance." Reed clenched his fists. "How much of a chance, doctor?" She removed her gloves and glasses, then sat across from him. "I don't give percentages. I give the truth." She pulled a paper and scribbled quickly. "Multi-organ failure, signs of collapse in heart, liver, kidneys from long-term malnutrition. Systemic infection, likely from an old wound on the hind leg, now mildly necrotic. Severe exhaustion. Immune system near shutdown. If we don't begin fluids, antibiotics, and support within 24 hours, I'm afraid—" She didn't finish. Reed cut in. "Do it. Whatever it costs. I have money. I have a military account." She studied him for a long time. In her gaze, Reed didn't see doubt. He saw a weighing of spirit. Then she spoke softly. "I need your signature. This case is high risk. Nothing is guaranteed, but if he makes it, it will take at least 6 months to recover. Are you ready for that?" Reed didn't hesitate. "I left him once. I won't do it again." She smiled, for the first time. Not long, not bright, but real. "Then we begin." Within 15 minutes, she summoned 2 assistants from the break room. One, likely a veterinary student, prepared the instruments and medications. The other handled the oxygen and IV setup. Reed was asked to step outside. He stood behind the glass door, watching. Inside him, everything felt frozen. Reed saw Shape, small and motionless on the steel table, surrounded by pale yellow light and the soft clatter of instruments. Each time the heart monitor gave off a long, sustained beep, Reed held his breath. Only when it resumed its steady rhythm did he dare to breathe again. Time passed slowly. Each minute felt like a year. Reed sank onto the plastic chair in the hallway, his face buried in his hands. Outside, it rained. Not heavily, but just enough to make everything colder. After a while, one of the assistants came out and handed him a paper cup of coffee. "She's good," he said. "If anyone can save your dog, it's her." Reed nodded, saying nothing. Inside him, thousands of questions, thousands of regrets, thousands of dark possibilities screamed all at once. But beyond that door, there was only one remaining hope. When Shape was taken into the treatment room, Reed stayed behind in the hallway, unmoving. Pale green walls, a crooked clock. His hands rested on his knees, lightly trembling. It felt like coming back to a chapter of memory that had never been closed. He didn't know how long he sat there. He only knew that, in those moments, everything came back. When Shape was just a pup, he used to bite Reed's bootlaces. Every morning, as Reed got ready to leave, his big military boots became the dog's favorite game. He didn't tear them up. He just gently clamped down and tugged backward, as if to say, "Just a little more time. Stay with me a bit longer." Once, Reed pretended to scold him. "No, Shape, I'm late." But the wagging tail, the bobbing head, the clear, trusting eyes made it impossible to walk away. Sometimes, the young soldier sat back down, retied his boots just to steal one more minute with his friend. Shape always leapt up when the door opened, even if Reed had only stepped out for 5 minutes. Whether he was taking out the trash or buying bread, the sound of keys in the lock was enough. Shape would be there, jumping like Reed had returned from across the world. There was no concept of time in a dog's loyalty. To Shape, every return was worth celebrating, worth bounding into Reed's arms with full, unshaken faith. Shape had the habit of lying beside the bed, refusing to sleep until Reed did. At first, Reed thought it was just a clingy behavior. But then there were nights he tossed and turned, unable to sleep, his mind full of ruins from training drills. Shape was always there, eyes open, silent, his head near Reed's hand. Only when he heard Reed's breath calm did he slowly close his eyes and begin to breathe softly, careful not to wake him. And then the nightmares began. They didn't come often, but when they did, they came like crashing waves. Reed would jolt up in the night, shirt soaked with sweat, hands trembling, eyes wide in panic like he was still inside a trench. In that chaos of darkness, Reed didn't know where he was. And then, a touch. Not a hand, not a voice, but a wet nose against his palm, a warm breath on his skin. Shape had risen, no one knew when. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He just sat beside him, unblinking, watching, a gentle lick on the wrist, a soft nudge to the chest. And like magic, Reed's heart began to slow. The nightmare didn't vanish, but it had something to anchor to. The first time, Reed thought it was coincidence, but it happened again, and again. Every time the nightmares came, Shape was the first thing to bring him back to earth. No command, no signal, just a touch, a breath. No sound was more soothing than that breath. No therapy more powerful than the quiet presence of a soul that never left. One winter, Reed couldn't sleep for a whole week. He was so restless that he couldn't open his eyes during the day. Shape, instead of sleeping at night like usual, stayed awake too. He sat beside him, not nudging, not pleading, just being there. Reed cried that night, not from pain, but because he didn't feel worthy, and still he was loved. Still he was trusted. Another time, right before deployment, Reed was packing. Shape followed his every step. When Reed sat to fasten his backpack, Shape placed his chin on his knee. When he packed up his gear, Shape brought over his favorite toys, a torn rubber ball, an old sock Reed had forgotten, as if to say, "Take me with you. Take the familiar with you." But he couldn't. Reed had hugged Shape one last time and whispered in his ear, "I'll come back. Wait for me." Shape didn't answer. He simply licked Reed's hand, then sat on the porch, watching the military truck roll away like a silent statue. Now, sitting here in the hallway, recalling all of it, Reed felt every memory fall into place. Together they formed a single, clear shape, the shape of a promise no one kept. But one soul had kept it anyway. Shape hadn't forgotten, hadn't blamed, hadn't grown bitter. He had waited. And that, more than anything, was what Reed couldn't forgive himself for. Because sometimes, what breaks a man isn't the sound of gunfire. It's the memory of a tail once wagged, a pair of eyes that once followed, a promise once made, but never kept. He had promised to return, but like so many promises made during war, it had been swept away by sand and time. Only one thing remained. Shape had kept his word. He had waited, even if that waiting meant loneliness, hunger, pain, and being forgotten. Even when no one cared, even when everyone left. He stayed, like a piece of memory that had never disappeared. An old collar, with faded letters, was now the last remaining proof of an unkept promise. In a world where people often forget the small things, that name had preserved a fragment of soul no one else dared to hold on to. Shape, no longer just the name of a dog, but the name of a vow, a reminder, a tangible shape of something once spoken and never completed. That night, Reed didn't leave the veterinary clinic. He slumped in the hallway, eating nothing, sleeping even less. Sometimes he stood and paced in front of the treatment room. Every time the door opened, his heart clenched. Every time the surgical light flickered on, his spirit sank. And then, at 4 a.m., the doctor stepped out and sighed. "He's stable, out of critical condition. But from here, it'll be another journey. Long, hard. He'll need you with him." Reed jumped to his feet, disbelief flooding his face. He'll live?" She nodded. "If there are no complications, if you follow every instruction, he's a fighter, but he needs someone to fight with him." Reed collapsed onto the edge of a table, gripping it tightly. He didn't cry, but cold sweat dripped down his face, as if his body had just been released from some invisible vice. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come early tomorrow. I'll guide you through his care. But tonight, let him rest." Reed nodded. And when he looked back through the glass, Shape was asleep. Gently. No more tremors. No more broken breaths. A creature once thought lost, now resting, bathed in warm light, surrounded by steadfast hands. And he knew. This was the second time Shape had come back from death. But this time, Reed would be the one waiting. With everything words could never fully say. He didn't go home right away. Instead, Reed sat for an hour in his old pickup truck, forehead resting on the steering wheel. His heart was a tangle of guilt, hope, and an unspoken fear that he might lose Shape again. But when night fell, he returned. The wooden door creaked open, still the same house, dusty, silent, waiting to be brought back to life. Reed turned on the light, then turned it off. He chose the glow of a small table lamp. A warm light, enough to see, but not enough to disturb the quiet. He began cleaning. Not the kind of surface cleaning done out of habit, but a slow, intentional touching of each object, each corner, as if every item held a memory in need of release. Every speck of dust, every smudge was a forgotten moment. Reed wasn't just cleaning a house, he was retracing time. The floor, where his childhood steps once echoed, knees scraped, and laughter knew no fear. The window, where his father used to stand silently for hours, watching the garden in quiet afternoons, as if something outside remained unsaid. And the kitchen, where his mother cooked stew on rainy days, seasoned always with a kind of tenderness no word could name. He pulled down each moldy curtain, brushing gently as if afraid of harming time. He knelt and wiped every tile with warm cloth. Some were chipped, some sunken, but he didn't replace them, just cleaned them, as if preserving honest memories. The bedsheets were washed by hand and dried under the late afternoon sun. The new curtains weren't too white, just enough for sunlight to pass through as it used to. Then he stopped at the corner of the living room, not by accident, but as if instinct had led him there. There, Reed laid out a large, soft blanket. He smoothed each fold by hand. He stacked warm, dried towels into a cushion, making a soft nest, wide enough for a body once reduced to bones. An old pillow, once his mother's, was placed beside a stainless steel bowl that gleamed like a mirror. He didn't speak it aloud, but in his heart, he thought, "This is your bed now, Shape. This time, it's real. No one will leave you again." Then he went to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. Empty. Only some white rice and a bag of frozen greens remained. Reed paused for a moment, then grabbed his coat and walked to the night market. The market was damp, lit by yellow lamps, with few people passing by. But Reed moved slowly, as if he wasn't just picking ingredients, but choosing how to begin again. He selected fresh beef, tender, low-fat, baby carrots, pumpkin just ripe. Not much, just enough for one pot of stew, something easy to digest, easy to swallow. Back home, he peeled each piece, carrots diced into tiny cubes, pumpkin carefully peeled with a dull blade, so he worked slower but more gently. Reed wasn't a good cook. But that night, every movement, from chopping onions to stirring the pot, felt like a silent ritual of redemption, an unspoken effort to bridge 13 months, to make up for a farewell that never came at the right time. The stew began to boil. Its gentle aroma filled the house, slipping through door cracks, wrapping itself around the curtains, drifting all the way to where Shape lay sleeping. The air softened. There was no need for bright lights, just the warm golden glow from the kitchen and the mingling scent of meat and vegetables, as if home had never left. Reed didn't eat. He just sat there, watching the soup bubble in silence. His gaze drifted far, through the flame, through the steam, to some place not here. Maybe to the image of a younger Shape curled up in his army jacket at the barracks, ears twitching at the sound of boots marching past. Maybe to the last time Shape barked as Reed left home, that look in his eyes as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Or maybe to the moment he found Shape in the broken wooden kennel, barely breathing. When life had become so thin, so fragile, that even a single step away might have made it disappear forever. Reed carried the bowl of soup to Shape's bedside. The scent made the dog's ears twitch slightly. He didn't open his eyes, didn't move, but his chest rose more visibly. Reed took a spoon, scooped up a small portion, and brought it gently to the edge of Shape's mouth. He didn't eat, but his lips trembled, like he sensed something familiar. Reed whispered, "It's okay, tomorrow's fine. We have time." And this time, Reed truly believed it. That night he lay on the floor, just a breath's distance from Shape. No thick blanket, no bed, just a thin layer of fabric beneath his back. But for Reed, it was the only place he could rest, because from there, if Shape needed him, he would hear. Every tiny action, lifting the lid, wiping the bowl's rim, folding a warm towel, became a form of presence, not to be thanked, not to be noticed, but a quiet message to the sleeping creature beside him. This time, I'm not leaving. And the house, once abandoned, began to warm again, not from rising temperature, but because two souls had chosen to stay, one learning how to care again, one learning how to trust, and between them, a small bed, a handmade stew, and a scent that never left. By morning, Reed returned to the clinic. The doctor greeted him with a soft smile, no questions needed. She helped him place Shape into a fabric-lined basket, wrapped carefully like a child. Shape opened his eyes, blinked slowly, weak but aware. Reed exhaled deeply. At home, Reed set the basket gently in the middle of the room. He didn't lift Shape out right away. He sat beside him and spoke softly. "This is home, Shape. We're starting over, right here." He ladled soup into a bowl and placed it near the dog's nose. Shape didn't eat, but his eyes followed Reed. Those eyes no longer shone like they once did, but they still held that same gaze. The one that once convinced Reed that even if the world exploded outside, there would always be somewhere to return to. Reed smiled faintly. "It's okay. Tomorrow's fine. You don't have to rush. We have time." He spoke as if soothing his own soul. Time, something once stolen by war and fear, was now rekindled, spoon by spoon, carrot by carefully diced carrot, grain by grain of rice rinsed in warm water. That night, Reed didn't sleep in his bed. He lay on the hardwood floor, just a few steps from Shape's bed. No mattress, no pillow, just a thin blanket. But to him, it was the only place he deserved to be. Because some apologies cannot be spoken. They can only be lived, quietly, closely, and without leaving. Each of Shape's breaths, no matter how faint, was a question that needed no answer. And Reed's presence was his only reply. "I'm here now. I'm not leaving again." The days that followed became a quiet loop of devotion. Nothing glamorous, nothing needing witness. Reed woke at 6 a.m. every day, checked the room temperature, adjusted the heater to just the right warmth, not too dry for Shape's nose. He moved gently, afraid even a small sound might startle the dog. Then he reheated the stew, using a porcelain spoon, not metal, to avoid clinking that might cause distress. He relearned how to inject into thin, bruised skin. His hands shook the first time, but the doctor's voice echoed in his mind like breath. "Just do it like placing a note on a music sheet." He cleaned every wound, not quickly, but with patience. Each time Shape flinched in pain, Reed whispered, "I'm sorry. Just a little more." Shape never replied, but every time he stayed still, It was a kind of permission, a quiet forgiveness. Every time Shape lifted his head, it was a victory. He didn't have to stand. Just to hold his own weight with his neck, to look toward Reed, was enough for him to write in his notebook. Lifted head, 10 seconds, circled. Bolded. He recorded everything. When breathing was steady, how often he blinked, the warmth of his ears, the moisture of his nose, the reflex when his paw was touched, each detail like a sketch of life redrawn, fragile, trembling, but clear. Then one morning, Shape touched his nose to Reed's hand. Reed had dozed off, slumped over the bedside. The first thing he felt was a gentle warmth, not quite wet, but definitely alive. He opened his eyes, thinking he was dreaming. But no. Those deep, familiar eyes were looking right at him. For a few seconds, neither moved, neither spoke, just presence, full and quiet, like two broken souls finding each other again, in the middle of what was once ruin. That evening, Reed placed a small speaker beside Shape's bed. He didn't choose a sorrowful tune. He played Chopin, gentle, wordless, just the sound of breath shaped into melody. He sat beside Shape, one hand resting lightly on the dog's back, feeling every rise and fall of his chest. Not steady, but rhythmic. A sign of return. Reed no longer saw Shape as an abandoned dog. He was proof of something larger, of endurance, of a love that needed no words. Each time Reed tore a piece of meat into tiny shreds and placed it at Shape's cracked lips, he wasn't just feeding him. He was saying, "I still believe, and I believe in you." The house began to change. Not cleaner, more alive. The dust on the staircase faded after each pass of Reed's cloth. The air felt lighter. Even the wind whistling through the cracks seemed less cold. Because inside, two beings were learning how to exist again. Reed, once a man driven by battlefield reflexes, was now guided by gentler instincts. He no longer measured in days, but in signs. Not, "It's the 5th day since I returned." But, "Today, Shape drank 3 spoonfuls of water without the tube." And Shape, he didn't need to stand or run. He just needed to open his eyes in the morning, without fear, without seizures, to stretch one paw, to wag his tail at the sound of familiar footsteps, each small gesture, a memory reawakening. Every action from Reed, folding a towel, mixing warm water, whispering something no one else heard, was a quiet apology. Unspoken, unannounced, but more sincere than anything words could offer. And that was the small fire. A fleeting hope, rekindled each day. Not because Reed believed Shape would fully recover, but because he believed that presence, that staying, was already a miracle. In that old house, there were no barks, no calls, only breathing. And that breath, it was an apology, a beginning, and proof that trust, even when abandoned, could return. Slowly, gently, and just enough to save them both. In that old house, there were no barks, no calls, only breathing. And that breath, it was an apology, a beginning, and proof that trust, even when abandoned, could return. Slowly, gently, and just enough to save them both. That night, the wind brushed against the metal roof. Dry branches clattered on the wooden porch. Inside, Shape lay motionless on the bed made of layered, soft towels. His breathing was steady, not deep, but regular, as if life had returned without needing to announce itself. Beside him, Reed lay curled on a thin blanket. No bed, no pillow, just the wooden floor and a distance small enough that one touch could still happen. His eyes were closed, but his nerves were tight as strings. A sound came, from somewhere, not loud, not clear, but enough to snap his eyes open. Cold sweat dampened the back of his neck. His hand curled, searching for a weapon. Quickened breath, tense lungs. Not from exhaustion, but from memory. Memories that hadn't faded with borders or time. They stormed in like a midnight tempest, tearing down the walls between now and then. In his mind, explosions, dust, screams, metal slicing air like a shrieking siren. Someone called his name, a voice broken loose from the past. He shot upright, heart racing, chest collapsing. The air in the room felt stolen. Reed doubled over, palms on the floor, gasping like someone pulled from water. And then, a movement. So small, so slow. From Shape's bed, a form began to shift. He couldn't walk, but he crawled, using his front legs. His body dragged across the floor like a shadow gliding through wreckage. Each move made him pant, but he didn't stop. Once, then again, each push tearing through his healing pain. But Shape kept going, not out of instinct, but something deeper. Connection. Every inch forward was a defiance of pain. A message. I'm still here. I know you're drowning. Reed didn't notice at first. He was busy holding himself up, trying not to fall, trying not to let the darkness inside consume him, like all those nights before. But then, a touch, soft, slow, a nose pressed into his chest. Reed startled, opened his eyes, and saw Shape. The dog had placed his head on Reed's chest. No bark, no whine, just closed eyes and breath, a slow, wide, steady breath. Each exhale filtered through pain, but unbroken. Reed let go, sat still, and let himself tremble. But this time, not from fear, because now, he knew. He wasn't alone. Shape said nothing. He couldn't. But he had dragged himself through pain, through the line between reflex and consciousness, just to reach Reed, to lay his head there, on his chest, like an anchor, a milestone, a launch pad for something beginning again. They sat there in the dark. No one spoke, no one moved. A man once screaming in dreams, a soul once waiting in ruins. Now, reaching each other in the only way they still believed in. Presence, no promises, no expectations. Just staying. The wind outside whispered through the cracks in the doors. Moonlight draped its silver hue across the old wooden floor. And there, in the middle of it all, stood a man and a creature once left behind. They breathed, together. No reasons needed, no words, only the knowing that someone was still listening. And if you listen long enough, a soul can step into another's dream, not to speak, but to remind, I never left you, not ever. That night, between the rhythm of breath and the scent of old wood, between panic and peace, between trauma and the present, Reed knew he had been saved. Not by medicine, not by therapy, but by a single touch. A touch from a creature who had never learned how to give up. You came for me? Reed asked, not expecting a reply. There was no hope in his tone, no need for confirmation. Just a voice breaking through from deep within, where cracks had never sealed. But in Shape's fragile breathing, there was a subtle tremor, like wind brushing the surface of still water. Not sound, not reflex, just breath, carrying more meaning than any word Reed had heard in all his years as a soldier. A response without language, but one that pierced through the thickest armor in his soul. Reed didn't sleep again that night, but he no longer shook, no longer curled beneath cold sweat, no longer sat upright in darkness, straining for ghosts. Shape, still there, his head resting on Reed's chest, was breathing, steady, slow, just enough to remind Reed that life was still present, no matter how thin it seemed. And in that moment, a weary soul, once abandoned, stepped into the dream of a soldier who thought he'd lost the ability to dream. A soul, with 4 weary legs and broken breath, touched the deepest part of a man's heart. Not with strength, not with sound, but with existence. The next morning, when sunlight filtered through the faded curtains, Reed woke. His eyes stung, not from nightmares, but because for the first time, he felt light. As if he had finally let go of the pack he'd carried across miles without knowing why he couldn't put it down. Shape was still there, right beside him, sleeping, not curled in fear, not gasping for air, just a tired being, finally allowed to be tired. No need to brace, no need to be ready for war, and that was what brought tears down Reed's cheeks, silent and unstoppable. He rose from the old blanket and went into the kitchen. The tap water was still freezing, but he boiled it, brewed tea with dusty old bags, and played a quiet instrumental track. The sound, soft as breath, seeped gently into spaces inside him that had once been frozen solid. He sat beside Shape's bed and opened his notebook and wrote, "Night 6. No startling, no medication. Maybe we're starting to trust each other." From that day on, Reed slept beside Shape every night, not out of fear he'd relapse, not out of worry, but because he too needed something real, a breath, a heartbeat, another soul nearby, to keep from falling again. Some nights, Shape crawled closer. Other nights, he simply lay still, breathing soft as mist. But every night, there was breathing. And that rhythm, it was what tethered Reed to the world. The old house, once a ruin of absence, slowly changed. Not through furniture, not through paint, but through presence. A small plant on the windowsill, once thought dead, began to bloom. Sparrows returned to the roof, and mornings, once the worst part of the day for Reed, no longer felt like threats. He began waking early, not from panic, but from wanting to see Shape breathe in peace, wanting to make soup before the dog woke, wanting to let Chopin play softly before the sun rose. And for the first time, he didn't need sleeping pills. One night, Reed dreamed. But it wasn't a nightmare. In the dream, there was a golden field under the setting sun. There was wind rustling the tall grass, and in the distance, a dog running free, no leash, no bandages, no signs of pain, no gunfire, no blood, no bodies, only light, and a peace so deep that when he awoke, tears soaked his pillow and he didn't know why. Shape touched his cheek, not with his paw, not with his nose, but with a lick, gentle, clumsy, as if still learning how to connect again. And just that was enough to make Reed laugh, a short, soft laugh. But real! He placed a hand on Shape's head, stroking from brow to neck. An act that had once been reflex, now returned as privilege. He whispered, uncertain if aloud or just in his heart, "Thank you." And in the light of a cloudless day, with sunlight spilling through dusty blinds, Reed looked at Shape and murmured, "I came back for you. But maybe you're the one who brought me back." Mornings in the old house were no longer frozen in a numbing silence. They had become something else. Still quiet, yes, but no longer cold. Stillness remained, but it was peace, not emptiness. Reed Saul woke before the sun, made himself tea, put on soft music, swept the floor, jotted down notes in a small notepad. For the first time in months, he felt there was something about today worth waiting for. On the small bed in the corner of the living room, Shape stirred. At first, just a tired yawn. Then slowly he lifted his head. A small motion, yet one that held the weight of the universe. His frail neck trembled with effort. Amber eyes looked at Reed, then at the water bowl placed nearby. Reed remained still. No urging, no coaxing. He simply placed a hand on the table's edge and waited. Shape moved. One leg, then another. Starved muscles convulsed. Fractured joints seemed to plead for mercy, but he didn't stop. Inching forward, breath quick and shallow, hind legs clenched tight, he stretched his neck, and his tongue touched the surface of the water. Reed nearly broke into tears. He didn't clap, didn't cheer. He simply bowed his head, hands clasped together like someone giving thanks. In that moment, there was no rescuer, no rescued, only two living beings, learning how to exist all over again. From that day forward, Shape no longer needed the bowl right next to the bed. Reed placed it a little farther each day, recording every distance in his notebook. Day 10, Shape moved 70 centimeters on his own. He still couldn't stand, but he could crawl, to the food bowl, to the sunlight, to Reed's side each night. As for Reed, he gave up sleeping pills. At first, the nights were hard. His body twisted in restlessness, eyes wide open to the ceiling, ears alert like they were trained to hear gunfire at any second. But then, he remembered the breathing, not his, but Shape's. Soft, long, even. He inhaled in time with that rhythm, exhaled the same, and strangely, he slept. The first breakfast he made for himself was oatmeal and eggs, coffee brewed by hand, not the quick dissolve kind. He set 2 plates on the table, one for himself, one for Shape, still the same slow-cooked stew and mashed vegetables. Shape never finished his portion. But every spoonful swallowed lifted a little weight from Reed's chest. They began to find rhythm. Not fast, not perfect, but real. Mornings, wake early. Noon, sunbathe. Afternoon, read beside one another. Evenings, Chopin or Satie. Sometimes Reed would lower his book, scratch behind Shape's ear, and see him stretch out his legs, a lazy motion, yet so alive. One afternoon, Reed tried opening the back door. It had been a long time since sunlight was allowed to fill the house. The door creaked open, and the late light spilled in like a greeting. Golden, warm, gently unfamiliar. Shape squinted, overwhelmed by the light he had once forgotten. But he didn't shrink, didn't look away. He looked, slowly, cautiously, but he looked. It was a small thing, but to Reed, it was a miracle. He crouched down and gently lifted Shape into his arms. The frail body pressed against him like a breathing memory, delicate, trembling, but still alive. He laid Shape on a folded blanket on the wooden porch, the same porch where his father once sat on autumn afternoons, where his mother used to hang clothes and tell stories. Reed sat beside him, saying nothing. Together, they looked out into the yard. Before them, the old maple tree had begun to turn, green giving way to gold, then amber. The leaves had not yet fallen, but something in their color whispered, time was moving, and change could not be stopped. A light breeze stirred the canopy, and in that moment a sparrow landed on the mossy fence. Shape's ears twitched, then his tail wagged, not fast, not strong, but it moved. A small motion, carrying an entire universe of return. That night, as the house settled into its hush, Reed wrote in his notebook, Day 15, he saw the sky. So did I. Days 16 through 19 passed slowly. Nothing obvious changed. But Reed sensed that every joint in Shape's body was relearning how to live. He began stretching his neck more. Every morning, when sunlight hit the wooden floor, he would try to crawl toward it and lie still. Reed didn't help. He just watched quietly, sometimes plucking an old melody, sometimes reading aloud, like his mother used to do. Day 20, Shape held himself up on both front legs for a few seconds. No warning, no signs. Reed was chopping vegetables in the kitchen when he heard the floor creak. He turned. There was Shape, trying to stand, front legs trembling like young trees in early wind. Reed didn't rush. He stood nearby, solid as a wall, but didn't touch. And when Shape collapsed, Reed sat beside him, patting his lap. Shape crawled to him, slow, painful, but purposeful, rested his head on Reed's knee. They both breathed. They both were. That kind of understanding. No words could carry. Day 25. Reed began tying a soft cloth around Shape, like a support harness, and walked with him out into the yard. He didn't call, didn't urge, just walked beside him. When Shape grew tired, they stopped. When Shape lay down, Reed lay down too. They watched the sky, counted clouds, listened to the wind through branches. One day, Shape slipped, fell hard, panting until his lips turned bluish. Reed didn't panic. He knelt beside him, cleaned his belly, stroked his spine gently, and whispered, "We're not in a rush. You don't need to go anywhere." Day 30. The air turned crisp. Dew clung to the grass. Reed led Shape to the yard, like every morning. But today, Shape did something new. He stood, trembling, on all four legs. His eyes looked toward the house. Reed froze, throat tight. That image, a creature once too weak to move, once known only by breath, now standing, even for a few seconds, was something no language could ever capture. "You don't have to go anywhere," Reed whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just stay." From that day on, every afternoon came with footsteps, not far, not steady, but steps nonetheless. And those steps weren't about leaving. They were about presence, about proving that what once broke could bloom again. At night, when classical music floated through the old house, Reed sat down to write. The handwriting was crooked, but honest. Day 32. He doesn't look at me like a stranger anymore. Day 35, the house began to smell like life again. Not just the scent of soup or tea, but the kind of air that had been breathed in by two souls who once thought they were lost. The scent of freshly washed rugs, of windows left open, of clothes sun-dried under real sunlight. Reed realized he had turned the lights on without fear, had played music without needing to drown out the sound of his own heartbeat. Day 40. The cactus on the windowsill bloomed again. A single, milky white flower opening in the golden sun. Reed didn't say anything, but there was light in his eyes. And then one morning, without warning, before the sun had fully risen, while the air still held the scent of night dew, Reed woke. He turned his head and saw Shape standing beside the bed. Not crawling, not dragging, standing on all four legs, trembling but balanced. "Good morning, soldier," Reed said, his throat tight. No bark, but Shape stepped forward and touched his nose gently to the back of Reed's hand. One slow wag of the tail, then stillness. His gaze was no longer lost. It was focused. And that focus was here. From that moment on, they entered a new place. They no longer counted days as time ticking away, but as moments of rebirth. There was no need for goals, no need for plans. Because for souls who had fallen to the deepest silence, the first steps weren't meant to lead somewhere. They were meant to stay. A week later, on a sunny weekend morning, Reed decided to take Shape to the park, for the first time since the long days of rebuilding. Not far, just a trail that circled a small lake. There were trees, there was wind, there were children laughing near the grass. Shape rode in a cart Reed had modified himself. Soft rubber wheels, thick fabric lining, and a front opening just large enough for his head to poke through. They moved slowly, in a rhythm like a familiar piece of classical music. Shape seemed to enjoy the air here. He inhaled deeply, ears perked at birdsong, eyes brightening whenever sunlight hit his face. A young boy approached and asked if he could pet him. Reed nodded. Shape tilted his head, not barking, not backing away, just gently touched the boy's hand with his nose. Once again, as always, his presence was the answer. They turned down a path near the playground. Reed stopped the cart, sat beside Shape, and took out a cloth to wipe his legs. Shape licked his hand, his first spontaneous gesture since recovery began. Reed smiled. Something inside him softened, as if the last layer of ice had finally melted under true warmth. And then, peace shattered. A piercing scream echoed from the distant grass. Reed turned. A large dog, pit bull or some kind of mixed fighter, had broken free, sprinting straight toward a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old. No one reacted fast enough. The handler had fallen, the leash dragging. Everything happened in a sliver of time, like a blade slicing between life and danger. Reed leapt to his feet, but before he could take a step, something moved in the cart. Shape. He launched himself out of the side, landing on his front legs. He didn't stand firm, but he tried. His eyes locked onto the girl, frozen in terror. No one else moved toward her. Only Shape. "Shape!" Reed yelled, but nothing could stop him now. With a body not yet healed, Shape ran, each stride a defiance of pain. Not strong, not fast, but direct. The other dog was close, its mouth wide, eyes red with fury. But then, a black shadow cut in from the side. Shape collided. No dodge, no tactic. He simply threw himself in. The impact cracked through the air like a heart breaking. Shape was thrown. His body flipped, arcing for a moment, then slammed into the ground with the heavy thud of something dropped from great height. The grass dented beneath him, stained instantly with a spreading patch of blood. The charging dog stumbled sideways, disoriented. It growled, ready to lunge again, but 3 men surged forward. One gripped its neck. Another pinned its legs. Shouts rang out. Someone yelled for the police. Chaos erupted across the park. But Reed heard none of it. He saw only one thing. A small figure lying still in the grass. He ran. His feet didn't touch the ground like normal steps. Everything blurred. Wind, voices, the metallic smell of blood. It all dissolved into mist. Only that Shape remained, barely breathing. He lay sprawled on the ground, one ear torn wide open, nearly split apart, a hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked through the fur on his back, spreading like a wound, rewriting the price of courage. Reed dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the crowd, didn't hear the voices calling his name. He lifted Shape into his arms, gently, as if cradling a child. The dog's body was limp, but his eyes were still open. Clouded, fading, but not gone. There was still something there, like the last ember in a dying hearth. "Why would you do that?" Reed whispered, voice cracking. "And still, you didn't hesitate." Shape didn't whimper, didn't move, but he hadn't passed out. His mouth opened slightly, as if struggling to draw in one more breath. Each gasp was ragged, broken, as if dragging the full weight of life along with it. A woman from the crowd stepped forward with a white cloth. Her hands trembled. A man shouted into his phone, voice rising with urgency. "The dog's badly injured, losing a lot of blood. We need a vet ambulance now." Reed held Shape tighter. Blood seeped into his shirt, blooming like an old curse returning. But this time, he wasn't letting go. When the emergency vet truck arrived, Reed refused to let anyone else touch Shape. He climbed inside, holding the dog close, like clinging to the final breath left in a living soul. Inside the vehicle, silence pressed down on everyone. No one spoke. Reed leaned in close, whispering as if summoning a spirit back from the edge. "You did so well. Hold on. Just once more. Stay with me once more." The familiar vet clinic came into view. Reed burst through the doors, still carrying Shape. An older woman, silver-haired, eyes lined with decades of knowing, stepped out. The moment she saw him, She paused. "It's him again?" she asked. Not surprised, not exasperated, just complete understanding. Reed nodded. He didn't need to say a word. Shape was laid on the surgical table. Nurses rushed in with fluids, checked vitals, sterilized wounds. The torn ear needed stitching. The broken leg required splinting. The blood loss was critical. The heartbeat, erratic. "The line is thin," the doctor murmured, her voice low like a prayer. "But he came back once before. Maybe he can do it again." Reed waited outside the operating room for hours, his arms still stained with Shape's blood. His eyes never left the red light above the door. The light that signaled the battle between life and loss was still raging inside. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just sat there, unmoving, fists clenched, hands trembling. The waiting room seemed to lose shape. Everything around Reed blurred. The flickering neon light above him pulsed like a soulless reminder that time was still moving forward, even though his soul had frozen in that moment when Shape collapsed on the grass. He no longer saw a hallway or a hospital, only the image replaying, Shape's run, no hesitation, no turning back. A leap carved from sheer will, lodged forever in Reed's memory like an arrow that could never be withdrawn. He remembered those eyes just moments before, eyes that had seen something far away and still chose to stay. No command, no signal. Shape didn't run because he was triggered. He chose to run because it was the right thing to do. Reed closed his eyes, hands still clasped. How many times had he sworn to protect Shape? How many promises had he whispered, vowing he'd never let the dog suffer again? But once again, it was Shape who stepped in. It was Shape, body broken, lying silent in his arms while the world looked on. "You're not just the dog who was saved," Reed murmured, throat burning. Each word scraped out like it tore through him. "You're the one who saved me, twice, and now, a little girl too." No one needed to hear it, but it had to be said, like a confession to himself. The light went off. The red light above the door stopped blinking. The door slowly opened. A wave of antiseptic and cold air drifted from the recovery room. The doctor stepped out, pulled down her mask. Her eyes were tired, but they hadn't given up. "He's stable, but very weak. He'll need close watch. He'll need you beside him." No questions, no explanations. Reed stood, as if the weight on his shoulders had disappeared for a moment. His legs were still numb, but his heart was allowed one normal beat again. He stepped inside. The room was cold, still. Every medical device beeped in rhythm, heart monitor, oxygen line, transfusion drip. But through all the sounds, one rose above the rest, the soft, steady breathing of Shape. He lay there, on a clean pad, his fur shaved in places, revealing rows of stitches, one ear torn and bandaged, the back leg set in a cast. A blood bag hung above, the tubing gently swaying with each weak pulse. But he was breathing. He was alive. Reed sat down, said nothing, just one simple act, placing a hand on Shape's head. His touch was so light it didn't disturb the wound, but firm enough that Shape would know. Someone is here. Someone came. He didn't cry, didn't smile. He just left his hand there, as if holding on to something that had come heartbreakingly close to slipping away forever. His hand was warm. His other hand gripped a crumpled notebook, the one where every step of recovery had been recorded. Something softened in Reed's chest, like an exhale barely heard, carrying tears that no longer needed to fall. Since returning to his hometown, he had never truly been sure he was alive. He existed. He breathed. But inside, all was ruin. Only when he laid his hand on a creature that had brushed against death did he finally feel what it meant to live. Because love doesn't have to be loud. And courage does not always roar. Sometimes courage is a silent leap into danger while others scream. It's a gaze that never waits for praise. It's a dog with broken bones and blood-stained fur who still chooses to stand in front, not behind. Another life. Reed looked at Shape. His breathing was weak but steady, not gasping, not fading. He breathed to say, quietly, that he had chosen to stay. Reed remembered it all. The park, the scream, the blinding sun, and that small figure bursting out from between two stunned adults. No one thought he could run. No one imagined he would choose to. And what broke Reed's heart more than anything was this. Shape hadn't thought of the cost. He didn't know he would break a leg. He didn't know his ear would tear so deep it would need stitching. All he knew was that a life needed protection. And that was enough for Shape to decide. Reed sighed, leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against Shape's. Cold, but alive. "You didn't have to," he whispered, a quiet confession to himself. "But you did." And sometimes, the only thing that keeps a person from feeling lost in this world is knowing that somewhere there is a soul, wounded, fragile, who still chooses to protect you with all they have left. Shape had done it again. No command, no call. Because for him, staying was not just survival. It was living. For love. Reed slid his chair back and sat beside the recovery bed for the entire night. The lights in the room stayed on, but his eyes finally closed, not from exhaustion, but from peace. And in the first sleep he had known in countless nights, he dreamed of a wide field, of sunlight, and a shadow running toward him. No gunfire, no blood, just grass, warmth, and a soul who had chosen once more to stay and walk beside him. The story of the dog who saved a little girl in the park spread like wind. Someone had captured the moment Shape leapt, not to a command, not pulled by a leash, just a lone dive into danger. The video swept through social media with the headline, "Backyard Guardian." Within hours, thousands of comments poured in. Some cried watching. Others shared memories of dogs they had once loved just the same. Veterans spoke of understanding the look in Shape's eyes, the eyes of a being who had survived things better left unspoken. One comment read, "I was a soldier once. I know not everyone makes it out with their heart intact. That dog, he didn't just survive. He kept a heart beating for those who lost theirs." Reed saw it all on the screen of his old phone. For the first time in years, he reopened a long-forgotten social media account. And for the first time, he posted a photo. Not of the battlefield. Not a badge. Just this Shape, his head bandaged, his leg in a brace, resting against Reed's knee. Below it, Reed typed only a few words. "He waited for me, helped me live again. And now, he saved someone I never even knew." Soon, thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. But one message, just one, froze Reed's hand in the air. "I was going to end my life tonight, but because of that dog, I'm still here. I don't know why, but I believe if a fragile creature like that still chooses to stay, maybe I can try one more day too." Reed read the message again, and again. He didn't reply. Not yet. He turned to Shape, sleeping now, breath steady, lips twitching as if in a dream. And in that moment, Reed understood. What Shape had done was more than saving a child. He had reached others he would never meet, souls suspended on the edge of despair. And he had done it simply by being. A being once broken, once abandoned, once saved, and still choosing to save. Reed opened the window. The breeze of early morning drifted in. He sat beside Shape again, hand resting on the dog's back. The other hand held a pen, and he wrote, Day 41. We're not whole yet, but we're learning to stay, for something, not for ourselves, but for someone else. That morning, the press came knocking. Reed declined interviews. But when a reporter asked if he had anything to say to those who had been touched by the story, he answered, "Not everyone needs a dog, but I believe we all need something to remind us. There are still beings out there who choose to stay, even when the world has never been kind to them." Later that day, the woman who had sent the message wrote again. "I bought a small flower pot, placed it by the window. For the first time in months, I want to see what it becomes." Reed smiled. A smile not for himself, but because he knew. Shape's story didn't end with him. He didn't just save one person. He saved the scattered pieces of those who once believed no one had the patience to reach them. An old man sent a photo. In it, he was sitting beside a blind, aging dog. He wrote, "We're both old now. But this morning, because of the backyard guardian, I decided to take him for a walk again." A high school teacher printed Shape's photo and pinned it on the class bulletin board, writing beneath, "Even in weakness, choose courage. Even in pain, choose love." A young woman wrote, "I don't have a dog, but I have a younger brother struggling with depression. I told him about Shape. He said, he wants to try again." Each line, each small message, was like a breath Shape had preserved inside a body once broken. And in that way, a dog who used to curl up in the forgotten corner of a backyard became a source of light. Not because he barked the loudest, not because he was trained to fight, but because he chose to love, chose to stay, with everything he had left. And that kind of love, even when it bloomed in the shadows of a quiet backyard, could still reach further than any signal in this world. Shape was no longer a wounded dog who got rescued. He was a living memory, a testament to something deeply simple, that sometimes, to change someone, you don't need strength. You just need to stay, to not walk away. You just need to sit there, beside them, until they feel safe enough to stand on their own. When the message from Hero Dog of the Year arrived, Reed thought it was a mistake. A formal email with a picture of Shape attached from the news article. They wrote, "We would like to honor Shape as a living symbol of courage and healing." Reed read it and closed the laptop. He didn't reply. Not because he wasn't proud, but because Shape was still recovering. His leg was still bandaged. The wounds hadn't fully closed, and Reed himself wasn't someone who felt comfortable in front of a crowd. He was used to silence, used to being behind the scenes, used to seeing the world only from a window, from a small kitchen, through the eyes of a dog. That evening, Shape lay on his old bed, the blanket folded neatly beside him. Reed sat nearby, one hand resting on the dog's back. He whispered, "We don't need a medal. You've been a hero for a long time." Shape didn't answer, but his tail moved. A soft wag. Not strong, not certain, but clear. And his eyes, they were the same as the very first day. Quiet, but full of direction. The next morning, Reed reopened the email. This time, he replied. He accepted the invitation. The journey to the awards ceremony wasn't long, but for Shape, every step was a small test. First, the car ride. He used to hate the engine's growl, used to curl into himself at the rumble behind him. But this time, he lifted his head, looked out the window. Calm. Then came the hotel. Strange smells, strangers, glances, cameras. Reed stayed close to Shape, but never ahead. He knew. Shape needed space, needed to walk in his own way. On the night of the ceremony, the stage was grand, the lights bright, the rows of seats filled with people. Deep red chairs stretched beneath the stage lights, holding the weight of stories waiting to be told. This was not a regular event. This was a place that honored beings who once broke, who once stayed silent, and who stood up again with only instinct to guide them. Each dog awarded had their own story. One had pulled someone from a fire. Another had found survivors beneath the rubble. One had stayed beside a dementia patient for years. The hall echoed with applause. Tears. Awe. Then came Shape's turn. The lights dimmed. A video played on the screen. It opened with Shape lying in the mud, eyes hollow. Then a clip of him trembling as he stood for the first time in weeks. And finally, the footage of him launching his body to shield the little girl from the attacking dog, his back soaked in red. No narration, just soft music and the sound of breathing. Reed stood beside him, wearing a suit, white shirt, black tie. For the first time in years, he dressed neatly, not for attention, but to honor the soul standing beside him. The host invited them onto the stage. The lights softened. Every eye turned toward the aisle. Reed bent down and placed his hand on Shape's collar, a small gesture, but full of weight. We're not here for applause, just to remind them that one soul chose not to turn away. Shape lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the glow ahead. Then he walked, slowly, but steady. Each step carried the memory of pain and the strength to rise again. Under the lights, his coat shimmered like silver. The room held its breath. The entire audience rose to their feet, not because he barked, not because he performed, but because he was there. A presence real and beautiful beyond any story. On stage, the host handed the medal to Reed in honor of Shape, a star-shaped medallion engraved with the words, "Hero Dog of the Year." Reed took the medal. He didn't say much, just raised a photograph, an old picture, where Shape leaned gently against his knee after the day they saved someone. The image was faded, but the eyes in it were sharp as ever. He said, "His name is Shape, because to me, he was the first form of trust after so many years of not believing in anything at all." No one spoke, no applause, not even a breath stirred, just silence, not awkward, but reverent. Then someone began to clap, softly, slowly, but it spread like a ripple, and soon the entire hall rose once again, not to cheer, but to bear witness to a soul who had lived true. Reed bent down and stroked Shape's back, the way one thanks a being who never needed words. They stepped down from the stage, not hurried, not proud, but like the final movement of a symphony, ending on its most beautiful, quiet note. The next day, the local paper released a new issue. On the front page, stark against the white background, was a photo of Shape. The dog who once carried a torn and broken body, now sitting upright on the stage of honor. His head tilted slightly, ears raised, as if listening to something beyond applause or announcements. The golden light softened across his eyes. Eyes that had seen war, reflected abandonment, lay waiting for death in a dark cage, and now were at peace. The headline, bold in italic black ink, read, "The Dog Who Didn't Give Up on Anyone." Reed stood at the newsstand in a small store down the street. He didn't grab the paper immediately, just looked at it for a few minutes, as if making sure that what he had lived through had truly been seen, recorded, and acknowledged by the world. Then he took 2 copies. One he folded carefully, slipping it into the inside pocket of his coat, like tucking away a piece of reborn past. The other he brought home. In the wooden cabin that once felt cold and dim, Reed chose a spot by the window, the place where morning light always arrived first. Beneath it was a small bed, lined with soft towels and a light blanket, Shape's favorite place to sleep. Reed said nothing. He simply pinned the newspaper clipping to the wall, smoothing its edges, then sat down quietly on the wooden floor. Shape was asleep, but not long after he stirred gently, then lifted his head. His deep brown eyes found the image on the wall. He couldn't read the words, but he understood everything beyond them. He didn't bark, didn't move much, just stared. A gaze filled with presence, as if to say, "That is me, and that is us." Reed looked back at Shape. His heart softened, not from a sudden wave of emotion, but from a realization slowly settling in. That name, Shape, would never fade again. No longer just a tag carved into a rusted collar. No longer a name only Reed knew and called. Shape had become a story, a symbol, a living proof that a soul, once discarded and silenced by pain, when reached the right way, could become a light for those who never thought they deserved to be seen. That name would be how Reed answered all the questions that once choked him into silence. Whenever someone asked, "How did you survive all that?" he wouldn't talk about prescriptions, wouldn't list the therapists, wouldn't speak of the nights strapped to wires in a dim therapy room, because all of that, while necessary, had never touched the darkest part of him. That part was only reached by a creature who didn't speak, but always knew how to stay. And so Reed's answer would always be, "I had a friend. He didn't speak, but he never walked away." And that alone was enough. One afternoon, a young woman knocked on Reed's door. She didn't say much, just held out a handwritten letter, then turned and walked away. Inside the letter, she wrote, "I once believed no one could understand the weight of loss without having to explain it. But because of Shape's story, I realized I'm not alone. In a world growing noisier by the day, where people search for meaning through louder voices, polished resumes, and glittering speeches, sometimes the one thing that keeps a person grounded is a silence that stays. A breath beside you, a quiet lean against your knee, a gaze that doesn't question." On a pale gray afternoon, with the sun leaning behind the rooftops, Reed heard a knock at the door. Not urgent, not forceful, just 3 knocks, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. He opened it. On the porch stood a young woman, small frame, hair tied in haste, eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. She didn't speak, just held out a handwritten letter. Her hands trembled faintly, but her eyes were steady, like someone who had come a very long way to arrive at the right place. Reed took the letter. She gave a small nod, then turned away, without waiting for a single word. Reed closed the door behind him and walked slowly into the living room, where Shape was still resting on the old cushion by the window. The dog flicked one ear at the sound of the door, but didn't lift his head. His tail moved just once, gently, as if to say he had noticed. Reed opened the letter. The handwriting leaned slightly, as if written in a hurry during a night full of thoughts. I used to believe no one could understand the feeling of loss without needing it to be spoken. I used to believe I was the only one who found the world unfamiliar, even while still living inside my own home. But then I saw the image of Shape, and I knew I wasn't alone. There was a pause. Then the letter continued. He didn't bark. He didn't look directly at the camera. But the way he leaned into your knee, closed his eyes and breathed, it made me believe that maybe there are beings in this world who don't need language, don't need a reason, and yet still choose to stay. Reed read to the end, then folded the letter slowly, as if afraid to crease something fragile. He placed it beneath the newspaper clipping on the wall, just above where Shape was lying. The dog remained asleep. His breathing was steady, his back rising and falling gently with the rhythm of a soft tune drifting from the old radio. Reed sat down beside him, his hand resting on the part of Shape's back where the scars used to be. When he first brought him home, that spot had been bruised black and torn open. There were nights Reed had to re-bandage it 3 times because the blood refused to stop. Now the fur had grown back, not even, not smooth, but warm. And beneath his palm, there was real breath. "You don't have to do anything more, you know," Reed whispered, maybe more to himself than to the dog. "You've been enough. Enough for a long time now." The little house was no longer cold. Not because of the heater, but because every corner, from the living room to the windowsill and the entryway, held a warmth that couldn't be measured in degrees. A warmth made of presence. On the wall, near the window where the morning light always passed first, hung a simple wooden frame. Inside it was the photo of Reed and Shape, taken the day the dog was honored. Reed in a suit, his eyes softened, and Shape with his head resting on Reed's knee, not posing, not looking into the camera. Just there. Like always. Beside the frame hung an old collar, once rusted, once flung from his body when he was abandoned at a training ground. Now it was polished clean, with a new metal tag that read, "Shape still here." Below it, on a small table beside the armchair, sat the letter from the girl who had written, saying that Shape's eyes had made her feel less alone. Reed didn't hide the letter in a drawer. He left it standing upright, as if it belonged there. Because he understood, this story was no longer just his. The house began forming habits. Each morning Reed would pour tea, put on a classical record, and Shape would lie exactly at his feet, where the sunlight filtered in and touched his coat that was finally growing in evenly again. Some mornings the dog would sleep. Some mornings he would gaze out at the backyard. But always, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes when someone knows they won't be left behind again. Reed no longer had to explain the nightmares. He didn't need to talk about the past, because the past now had shape and sound, but no longer carried edges sharp enough to cut. It played like an old film in reverse, sometimes surfacing, but never again making his hands tremble or his heart seize. When people asked him, casually, at a gas station or a grocery store or the vet's office, "How did you recover?" Reed didn't say much. He just nodded, pointed to Shape, now a silent yet powerful symbol, and said in a slow voice, like naming something sacred, "I have a friend. He doesn't speak, but he's never walked away." That was it. No more needed. Nothing missing. Real stories don't always need to be long. Sometimes they live in a single look, a gentle lick on the hand, or a steady breath in the middle of the night. That was the truth Reed knew best. After years of his life had been nothing but explosions, shouting, and an emptiness no medicine could reach. Now, each time he woke and heard Shape's footsteps padding through the wooden hallway, he knew he had made it through. He didn't need anyone to certify it. Surviving was proof enough. One afternoon, a small neighbor child came over, stood at the window looking at Shape, and whispered to her mother, "Mom, when I grow up I want to be like that dog." Her mother looked at Reed and smiled. No words were needed, just a small nod, and both sides understood. Some things are bigger than language. Reed turned to Shape. The dog was still dozing, unaware that someone was speaking about him. Yet, as always, he remained. Constant. Days went on. The cactus by the window bloomed again. Sparrows still visited the roof. Reed learned to cook a few more dishes. And Shape, he didn't need to learn anything new. He only needed to live, to breathe, and to stay. And sometimes, on cold nights when the wind slipped through the cracks, Reed would sit beside him, hand resting on his back like those first nights. They didn't need to say a word, because now silence no longer meant emptiness. It had become a language, a form of trust, a kind of love without conditions, without explanations, without needing anything in return. Just being there, that was enough. By nightfall, the small wooden house at the end of the street still held a light. Not a bright one, but a desk lamp. Warm and golden, just enough so that two figures lying side by side did not feel alone. Shape slept peacefully. His eyes fluttered slightly, as if chasing a dream filled with sunlight, wind, and someone who stayed. Reed did not sleep. He simply sat beside him, one hand resting on the dog who had taught him how to live again. Not through words, but through presence. Outside, the wind slipped gently through the old shingles. The scent of wood, warm tea, and quiet breathing blended into a kind of music no recording could capture. Maybe in this world some wounds cannot be healed by medicine. Some people may never find the words for their pain, and yet they are healed anyway by the gaze of a creature who speaks no language and asks for nothing in return. Shape was just a dog. Not a champion, not a prized pedigree, not a hero with medals, but to those who had once been lost, he was the last miracle of waiting. We do not need to be heroes. Sometimes, all it takes is being someone who listens long enough, someone warm enough to hold on to a small, trembling life, whether in the rain, inside a forgotten kennel, or on a sidewalk too busy to notice what is slipping away. Because sometimes, what saves a soul is not wealth or power. It is the moment you choose not to look away. It is a hand that reaches out. It is a whisper that says, "I'm here." If one day you see a small dog curled up under a street lamp, eyes still holding hope, if you hear a whimper from beneath an old porch, if one quiet afternoon, in the middle of your own busy world, a tiny tail wags your way, not begging, not pleading, just simply being there, then please remember this. You may not be able to save the whole world, but to that one life, you are the whole world. And sometimes, a name scratched onto a worn collar is enough to hold on to a soul that almost disappeared. And love, even if small or late, always has room to begin again. All you have to do is choose to stay. Some things don't need to be taught. They only need someone patient enough to listen. And some creatures may never say thank you in words, but they can teach us the one lesson many never learn in a lifetime: how to be human.